Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something grimmer than your Monday morning commute. Winter in New York's 5-point slums during the 1850s. Not the romanticised gangs of New York version, with theatrical knife fights and dramatic speeches. I mean the actual 5 points, where you'd freeze to death while simultaneously being poisoned by your water, your neighbour, and possibly your own shoes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to survive a New York winter when central heating meant 20 people breathing in the same room? Did anyone actually wash their clothes? Or did they just wear frozen dirt until spring? How many families shared a single room the size of your closet? What did people eat when even the rats looked malnourished? Could you handle sleeping in a building where the walls literally leaked sewage? Would you last a week without indoor plumbing when the outhouse was a block away and frozen solid? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in a 5-point tenement. The year is 1854. It's January. You're cold. You're hungry. Your blanket is a newspaper, and something just scurried across your face. Welcome to winter. It only gets worse from here. So you've woken up in 5 points, and the first thing you notice isn't the cold, it's the smell. A rich, layered aroma of human waste, rotting garbage, coal smoke, and something that might be a dead horse 3 blocks over. 5 points isn't just a neighbourhood. It's a social experiment gone catastrophically wrong. A place where immigrants, freed slaves, and the desperately poor are crammed into crumbling wooden tenements that were never designed to hold this many people. It's 1854, and you're living in what might be the most notorious slum in America, a place so infamous that even Charles Dickens visited and said, "Yeah, this is bad." The neighbourhood gets its name from the 5-pointed intersection where Anthony, Cross, Orange, Little Water, and Mulberry Streets all collide. It's right in the heart of Lower Manhattan, nestled between what will someday be Chinatown and the courthouses of Foley Square. But right now it's just mud, misery, and roughly 15,000 people packed into a few city blocks, like sardines in a very depressing tin. This used to be a pond. Seriously. The Collect Pond, a freshwater lake that supplied colonial New York with clean drinking water. Then the tanneries and slaughterhouses moved in, dumping their waste, turning it into a festering swamp. The city's brilliant solution in the early 1800s was to just fill it in with dirt and garbage and build on top of it. Imagine constructing an entire neighbourhood on what is essentially a toxic landfill that never stopped being wet. The ground still seeps, buildings sink unevenly, basements flood with brown water that smells like death's perfume. It's like building a subdivision on top of a Superfund site and then acting surprised when everyone gets sick. The architecture here isn't winning any awards. Most buildings are wooden, 4 or 5 stories tall, built as quickly and cheaply as possible by landlords who view human beings as revenue streams. These tenements were originally single-family homes from the late 1700s, back when 5 points was almost respectable. But as waves of immigration crashed onto New York's shores, Irish fleeing famine, Germans escaping revolution, freed black Americans seeking opportunity, landlords saw dollar signs. They subdivided houses into smaller and smaller units, carved up rooms with flimsy partitions, and packed in as many people as physically possible. You're living in what real estate agents today might call a cozy studio, but what is actually a 10 by 12-foot room that houses 8 people? There's no kitchen, no bathroom, no privacy. Just 4 walls, maybe 1 window if you're lucky, and the constant soundtrack of other people's lives bleeding through the paper-thin barriers. Your upstairs neighbour's footsteps sound like a drum corps. The family next door's arguments are clearer than your own thoughts. And that baby crying 3 rooms over? You know it's scheduled better than its own mother. The streets of 5 points are an adventure in urban navigation. They're unpaved, which means in winter they're frozen ruts of mud, horse manure, and unidentifiable slush. In summer, they're open sewers of liquid filth. Pigs roam freely, acting as the neighbourhood's garbage disposal system. Yes, pigs. in Manhattan. They're actually doing a public service, eating the trash that piles up because there's no sanitation department, no street cleaning, no city services at all, really. The city government has basically written off 5 Points as unsalvageable and moved on. Buildings crowd together so tightly that sunlight is a rare visitor. Alleyways are so narrow you can touch both walls at once. There are hidden courtyards in the centres of blocks, accessible only through dark passages, where the poorest of the poor live in structures that can barely be called buildings. Bottle Alley, Cow Bay, Murderer's Alley. These aren't cute nicknames, they're accurate descriptions. The deeper you go into 5 Points, the worse it gets, like descending circles of an urban inferno. The population here is diverse in a way that's unusual for 1850s America. Irish Catholics live next to freed black families. German Protestants share walls with Jewish immigrants. There are Italians, Chinese railroad workers who've drifted east, and native-born Americans who've hit rock bottom. In theory, this should be a beautiful melting pot. In practice, it's a pressure cooker of ethnic tensions, competition for jobs, and survival-based tribalism. Everyone's poor, everyone's cold, everyone's desperate, and desperation doesn't usually bring out humanity's better angels. The Irish make up the largest group, and they're not here by choice. The Great Famine sent millions fleeing starvation, and New York was where the ships landed. They arrived sick, traumatized, and penniless, only to be greeted with no Irish need apply signs and housing discrimination. 5 Points became their reluctant home because it was the only place they could afford, which is to say, the only place that would take them at all. The black community in 5 Points faces its own unique horrors. Many are freedmen and freedwomen who escaped slavery or were born free, seeking opportunity in the North. Instead, they found a different kind of oppression: poverty, discrimination, and danger. The Fugitive Slave Act means that even free black residents can be kidnapped by slave catchers and dragged back south. Living in 5 Points offers a kind of protective anonymity, but it's a cold comfort when you're freezing in January with no coal for heat. Saloons dominate every street corner. There are grocery stores that are actually just fronts for illegal liquor sales, dance halls where you can drink rot-gut whiskey and watch entertainment that ranges from Irish step dancing to boxing matches. Gambling dens, brothels and underground fighting rings operate openly because the police rarely venture this deep into 5 Points unless they're in groups. And when they do come, it's usually to crack skulls, not to help anyone. The neighbourhood has its own economy, its own rules, its own social structure. Gangs provide a kind of order that the city government won't. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Plug Uglies, they're not just criminals, they're political machines, social clubs, and protection rackets all rolled into one. They fight each other in massive street battles involving hundreds of people armed with clubs, bricks, and knives. These aren't secretive muggings. They're full-scale riots that sometimes last for days. But here's the thing about 5 Points that gets lost in all the horror stories. People actually live here. Real people with hopes, dreams, and surprising moments of joy. There are weddings celebrated with fiddle music and whatever alcohol can be scrounged. Children play games in the street, inventing entertainment from nothing. Neighbours help each other, sharing food when someone's even worse off than they are. There's a community here, fragile and dysfunctional, but real. And yet, you can never quite escape the knowledge that you're living in a place where disease spreads like gossip, where violence erupts without warning, and where winter is less a season and more a months-long test of whether you're strong enough to see spring. 5 Points isn't the bottom because there's always something worse, but from where you're standing in your frozen room that smells like humanity's collective failure, it's close enough. Welcome home, try not to die. Let's talk about your home. And when I say home, I mean a single room, maybe 10 by 12 feet, that you share with your entire family and possibly 3 other families who couldn't afford their own space. The building is 4 or 5 stories tall, built cheaply and quickly by landlords who've never seen the inside and never will. The walls are so thin you can hear your neighbours' arguments, their coughs, and the exact moment their baby starts crying at 3 a.m. There are no private apartments here, just rooms, stacked rooms, rooms within rooms, an architectural nesting doll of human misery. Your landlord is almost certainly an absentee slumlord who collects rent through an agent and has never set foot in 5 Points. He probably lives uptown in a nice brownstone with servants and indoor plumbing, collecting profits from your suffering. The rent for your shoebox of despair, about $4 to $6 a month, which doesn't sound like much until you realise that's nearly half your monthly wages. You're paying Manhattan prices for what amounts to a vertical chicken coop with worse ventilation. The building itself is an architectural nightmare held together by inertia and prayer. The foundation, remember, is built on filled-in swampland, so everything tilts slightly. Floors slope at odd angles. Doors don't close properly. Windows, if they haven't been boarded up or broken, refuse to open or refuse to close, never the one you need at any given moment. The stairs are death traps, wooden planks worn smooth by thousands of feet, with missing steps that you've memorized to avoid, but visitors discover the hard way, usually around 2 a.m. with a crash, and creative cursing in 3 languages. The wood is rotting. You can smell it, a sweet decay that mingles with all the other smells you're trying to ignore. The walls have gaps where the boards have warped and shrunk. These gaps aren't charming architectural features. They're highways for rats, mice, and the constant Arctic wind that turns your room into a wind tunnel every January. You've tried stuffing the cracks with rags, newspaper, old clothing, but it's like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. The cold finds a way. Your room has one window. One. It faces an air shaft approximately 3 feet wide that separates your building from the identical building next door. Sunlight is a theoretical concept. What you get instead is a dim grey glow that might be daylight or might be reflected lamplight from your neighbour's window. The air shaft serves another purpose. It's where people throw their garbage, their slop water, their chamber pot contents when they can't make it to the outhouse. So your window overlooks what is essentially a vertical garbage chute filled with frozen sewage. In summer, the smell is indescribable. In winter, at least it's frozen, though occasionally something thaws just enough to remind you what's down there. The ceiling is low, maybe 7 feet if you're lucky, and it leaks. Every time it rains or snows, water finds its way through the roof, through the apartments above you, and eventually drips into your space. You've strategically placed buckets and tin cans to catch the drips, creating a percussion section that plays all night. Some water just runs down the walls, creating permanent damp patches where mould blooms in artistic patterns. That mould? It's probably killing you slowly, but so is everything else, so you've learned not to worry about it. Your furniture is minimal because space is minimal, and money is non-existent. There might be one actual bed, if you can call it that, a wooden frame with rope strung across it, and a mattress stuffed with straw, rags, or horsehair, if someone died and left you something nice. This bed sleeps at least 4 people, packed in like logs, sharing warmth and lice in equal measure. Everyone else sleeps on the floor on pallets made of whatever soft material can be scrounged. Newspapers work surprisingly well as insulation, laid flat under your body. You're literally sleeping on yesterday's news, which seems metaphorically appropriate. There's maybe a table, probably just a plank across 2 barrels, a couple of broken chairs that you can't sit in at the same time because the floor space won't allow it. Your possessions fit in a single trunk or cloth bag because you don't own anything worth storing. A change of clothes if you're wealthy. Some cooking pots, maybe a tin cup for each family member, though sharing is more common. The idea of having your own mug, your own plate, your own anything, that's a luxury for people who live in places where the walls don't actively try to kill them. The room has no closet, no storage, no separation between sleeping, cooking, eating and living spaces. Everything happens in these 120 square feet. Babies are born here, old people die here, couples attempt intimacy while children are sleeping 3 feet away. There's no such thing as privacy. You know everyone's schedule, everyone's secrets, everyone's bodily functions. It's like living in a reality show that never ends and nobody volunteered for. Cooking happens over a small stove if you have one, or over an open fireplace that's shared with the room next door through a back-to-back arrangement that makes absolutely no sense from a safety perspective, but saves the landlord money on construction. The chimney barely draws, so smoke fills your room before it decides to exit through the flue. Your eyes water constantly. Your lungs develop what will someday be called chronic bronchitis, but what you just call the cough that won't quit. Every meal cooked is also a fumigation session. Laundry, when it happens at all, is done in the same room you sleep in. You haul water up 4 flights of stairs. There's no running water in the building, remember? Heat it on your stove using precious fuel, scrub your clothes by hand in a wooden tub, and then hang them on lines strung across the room. In winter, they freeze solid before they dry. In summer, they mildew before they dry. You cannot win. The building has one privy out back for approximately 80 people. 1. It's a wooden outhouse with a hole over a pit that hasn't been emptied in recent memory. In winter, it becomes a frozen monument to human waste, a popsicle of misery that doesn't melt until April. Most people, rather than venture outside in the middle of a January night, use chamber pots, and then either dump them out the window into the air shaft, or carry them downstairs in the morning, hoping not to slip on the ice and decorate themselves with the contents. Your neighbours aren't just next door, they're above you, below you, pressed against every wall. The O'Connors overhead fight every Saturday night after payday drinking. The Muller family below has 7 children who sound like they're running a marathon at all hours. The Johnsons to your left have someone dying of consumption. You can hear the coughing fits that rack their body. The Washingtons to your right are relatively quiet, which either means they're considerate or they've already died and nobody's noticed yet. At night, the building comes alive with sounds. Creaking boards as people shift in their sleep, rats scurrying in the walls like they're late for an appointment, babies crying, adults snoring, the occasional scream that might be a nightmare or might be something worse. You've learned to sleep through most of it, a skill that would be impressive if it weren't so deeply sad. And every month, like clockwork, the rent collector comes. He bangs on doors, demands payment, threatens eviction. If you can't pay, you're out. Your belongings are thrown into the street. Your family scatters to whatever shelter they can find. Another overcrowded tenement, a mission house, a doorway. There's always someone poorer, more desperate, ready to take your spot. The building doesn't care who occupies it. It just keeps standing barely, while the people inside try to do the same. This is home. It's not much, but it's yours. Until you can't pay rent, until the building collapses, until the fire comes, or until you finally escape to somewhere, anywhere else. Welcome to Vertical Living 5-Point Style. It's January in New York, and the temperature outside has dropped below freezing. Inside your tenement, it's maybe 5 degrees warmer. Maybe. You have no insulation, no weather stripping, and definitely no thermostat wars with your siblings. The windows, if they exist, are cracked or covered with cloth or newspaper because glass is expensive. Cold air doesn't just seep in, it barges through like it owns the place. Your breath creates clouds indoors. The walls frost over on the inside. Children huddle together like puppies, and still toes turn blue by morning. The cold in 5 Points isn't like modern cold, where you're briefly uncomfortable between your heated car and your heated office. This is relentless, grinding, bone-deep cold that never leaves. It's there when you wake up. It's there when you try to sleep. It's there during every moment in between, a constant presence that slowly steals your body heat, your energy, and occasionally your will to live. Your clothes are your only real defense, and they're not great. You're wearing everything you own, a thin cotton shift or wool shirt, maybe a second layer if you manage to acquire one, a dress or pants that have been mended so many times they're more patched than original fabric, and whatever shawl, blanket or coat you can wrap around yourself. The wealthy uptown wear wool overcoats lined with fur. You wear hope and determination, which provide approximately zero thermal protection. Your feet are especially vulnerable. If you own shoes, they're likely falling apart, with soles so thin you can feel every frozen cobblestone. Many people, especially children, go barefoot because shoes cost money, and children's feet keep growing. Walking on frozen ground through snow and ice with bare feet isn't a choice. It's just reality. Your feet stop hurting after a while. They go numb. That's actually worse than hurting because numbness means frostbite, and frostbite means losing toes, and losing toes means you can't work, and not working means you starve. It's a cascade of consequences that starts with cold feet. At night, the temperature drops even further. You pile into your shared bed with your family as many bodies as can fit, because human warmth is the only heat you have. You sleep in your clothes, all of them, plus whatever blankets, coats or newspapers you can layer on top. The person in the middle of the bed is warmest. The people on the edges wake up with frost on their hair. If you have children, they sleep in the middle, protected by adult bodies on all sides. If you're elderly or sick, You also get the middle spot because everyone knows you're less likely to survive the night on the edges. But even packed together, you're still cold. The kind of cold that makes your joints ache, that makes your muscles clench and never quite relax. That turns sleep into a light, shivering half-consciousness where you're never fully resting. You wake up more tired than when you went to bed because your body spent all night burning calories just trying to maintain core temperature. The walls offer no protection. They're single-layer wood planks with gaps between them. Wind whistles through these gaps, creating drafts that feel like tiny ice picks stabbing your skin. You've stuffed the worst cracks with rags, but there are always more cracks than you have rags. Some families hang blankets against the walls as makeshift insulation, but blankets are needed for sleeping, so it's a choice between slightly warmer walls or a slightly warmer bed. You can't have both. Water freezes indoors. The bucket of water you hauled up 4 flights of stairs yesterday? Solid ice this morning. You have to chip away at it or warm it near the stove just to get a drink. Washing anything becomes nearly impossible. The chamber pot freezes if you don't empty it quickly enough, creating a truly horrifying situation that requires picking up a frozen piss popsicle and somehow disposing of it. Your hands are perpetually cold, making even simple tasks difficult. Buttoning clothes becomes a feat of manual dexterity. Holding a spoon requires concentration. Any kind of fine motor work, sewing, for instance, which many women do for pennies, becomes torture as your fingers go numb and clumsy. You have to stop every few minutes to blow warm breath on your hands or tuck them under your armpits, which means you work slower, which means you earn less, which means you can't afford fuel for heat. The poverty cycle is also a cold cycle. Children suffer the most. Their small bodies lose heat faster than adults. Infants especially are at risk. Mothers keep babies pressed against their skin, under their clothes, sharing body heat directly. It's not unusual for families to wake up to find a baby has died in the night from hypothermia. It's called overlaying when a baby dies in a shared bed, but often it's not suffocation. It's just cold. The baby's tiny body couldn't generate enough heat to survive until morning. The elderly don't fare much better. Older people with less body fat, less ability to generate heat, slower circulation, they're basically candles burning out. Grandparents who survive summer often don't make it through winter. It's accepted, expected even. Winter is when the weak die, and nobody uses gentler terms because there's no point in being gentle about something that happens every year like clockwork. Getting dressed in the morning is its own special hell. You have to leave the relative warmth of your pile of sleeping bodies, stand on a frozen floor and somehow motivate yourself to face the day. There's no warm shower to ease you into consciousness. There's no heated bathroom. There's just the brutal assault of cold air on your sleep-warm skin. You move fast, pulling on your layers with shaking hands, your teeth chattering so hard you're afraid they'll crack. Going outside is even worse, but also somehow better. At least outside you're moving. At least there's sometimes winter sun, weak and watery, but still warmer than the perpetual shade of your tenement room. People bundle up and head to work not just for money, but because moving, working, exerting yourself, it generates body heat. Standing still means freezing. So you work even when you're sick, even when you're exhausted, because movement is warmth, and warmth is survival. The cold also brings illness. Pneumonia stalks 5 points like a hunter, picking off the weak, the young, the old. It starts with a cough, a fever, and then fluid fills the lungs. Without antibiotics, without proper medical care, without even a warm room to recover in, pneumonia is often fatal. Tuberculosis thrives in cold, crowded spaces where people huddle together breathing recycled air. The disease spreads from person to person, cough by cough, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Some people drink to stay warm. Alcohol creates the illusion of heat, a temporary flush of warmth that's actually just your blood vessels dilating and making you lose heat faster. But when you're freezing, that momentary sensation of warmth is worth the later consequences. Saloons are warm, heated for paying customers, so people spend money they don't have on whiskey they shouldn't drink just to feel their fingers again for an hour. There's a grim calculus to winter poverty. You can buy food or buy fuel, but rarely both. A load of coal or wood costs money that could buy bread for the children. So you choose heat or food. Most people choose food and just accept being cold. At least hunger is temporary once you eat. Cold is constant, and honestly, if you freeze to death, you won't be hungry anymore, so there's that. The wealthy uptown don't understand. They have fireplaces in every room, servants to tend them, coal delivered regularly. They wear fur-lined coats and wool suits. They travel in enclosed carriages. Their biggest winter complaint is that the opera house is drafty. They'll never know what it's like to sleep in a room where ice forms on the inside of the walls, where exhaled breath becomes visible fog, where children cry not from sadness, but from the physical pain of being too cold for too long. And yet you survive. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. You make it to February, then March, then finally April when the temperature climbs above freezing and stays there. Your body slowly thaws. Your perpetual shiver finally stops. You survived another winter in 5 points, which means you're tougher than you thought, luckier than you deserved, or possibly just too stubborn to die. The cold doesn't care about your resilience. It'll be back next December, same time, same place, ready to try again. If you're lucky enough to have a small stove or fireplace, congratulations. Now you get to play a fun game called Will This Kill Us? You burn coal, wood scraps, or whatever combustible trash you can find. The smoke has nowhere to go except through cracks in the ceiling or out a broken window, which means your room is perpetually hazy with toxic fumes. Carbon monoxide poisoning is common. People fall asleep near the stove for warmth and just never wake up. But hey, at least you weren't cold. Let's start with the stove itself, assuming you have one. It's a small cast iron box, maybe 2 feet square, sitting in the corner of your room on a piece of tin or stone to prevent it from setting the wooden floor on fire. Prevent is probably too strong a word, more like delay. The stove is old, cracked, and probably second-hand from someone who upgraded or died. The door doesn't close properly. The grate is broken. The flue is clogged with years of accumulated soot and possibly a dead bird or two. The chimney, if you can call it that, is a pipe that connects to a shared flue system running up through the building. Every room's stove connects to this same system, which means you're not just breathing your own smoke, you're breathing everyone else's too. When multiple families fire up their stoves simultaneously, the system backs up, and smoke just pours back into every room. It's like living inside a very slow, very inefficient smokehouse. You're not curing ham, you're curing yourself. Fuel is the next problem. Coal is the best option. It burns hot, lasts longer than wood, and produces more heat per pound. But coal costs money. A bushel might run you 15 to 20 cents, which doesn't sound like much until you remember you're earning maybe $1 a day if you're lucky. That bushel will last maybe a week if you're extremely conservative, which means you're spending nearly a third of your income just trying not to freeze. Math has never been more depressing, so you make choices. You ration the coal, burning it only in the early morning to knock the edge off the cold, and again in the evening when everyone's home and huddled together. During the day, the stove stays cold. You just suffer. Some families burn coal only every other day, some only on Sundays, some never, because they simply cannot afford it under any circumstances. Wood is cheaper if you can get it. But in a city like New York, wood is scarce. Trees are for rich people's estates, not for 5 points. You can scavenge wood scraps from construction sites, broken furniture from the street, or driftwood from the waterfront if you're willing to walk that far. Children are often sent out to collect anything burnable. Sticks, broken crates, barrel staves, whatever can be carried home and crammed into the stove. It's like an urban version of gathering kindling, except sadder and with more splinters. Then there's the creative fuel. Old shoes burn, sort of. Leather smokes terribly and smells like Satan's breakfast, but it does produce heat. Rags soaked in grease will catch fire. Newspaper, while needed for insulation and stuffing cracks, can be burned in emergencies. Some people burn bones from the butcher shop. They're free if you ask nicely, and they burn with an oily, acrid smoke that's somehow worse than leather. You're not above burning anything. Dignity went out the window around the same time your toes went numb. The actual process of heating your room is an exercise in futility. You get the fire going, which takes time, patience, and often multiple attempts because your matches are damp and your kindling is green. The stove starts to warm up. Heat radiates from the iron. Everyone crowds around it like it's a celebrity, extending frozen hands toward the metal. For about 3 feet around the stove, it's almost pleasant. Beyond that, still freezing. Heat doesn't distribute evenly in a room with gaps in the walls. It just rises straight up through the cracks in your ceiling, warming the apartment above you instead. You're basically heating your upstairs neighbour's floor, which would be generous if you were trying to be nice. But you're not. You're just poor, and physics is cruel. The smoke, though. Let's talk about the smoke. Even when the flue is working properly, which is rare, smoke leaks from the stove's broken door, from the cracks in the pipe joints, from the loading door every time you add fuel. This smoke fills your room gradually, creating a haze that hangs at eye level. Your eyes water constantly. You cough. Everyone coughs. That persistent hack you've developed isn't tuberculosis. Well, it might be, but it's definitely also smoke inhalation. Carbon monoxide is the silent killer, literally. It's colourless, odourless, and quietly suffocates you by preventing your blood from carrying oxygen. The symptoms, headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion, could be caused by a dozen things in 5 points. So nobody connects it to the stove until someone doesn't wake up. Families huddle close to the stove at night, seeking warmth, and sometimes in the morning someone has just stopped breathing. The authorities call it suffocation, or natural causes, because nobody really understands carbon monoxide poisoning yet. You just know that sleeping near the stove is dangerous, but so is sleeping away from it, so you make your choice and hope luck is on your side. Fires are an ever-present danger. Not the warming kind, the burning down the building kind. A spark pops from the stove onto a pile of clothing. A child gets too close and their nightgown catches. The stove overheats and ignites the wall behind it. The flue pipe, red hot from use, makes contact with a wooden beam. Tenement fires in 5 points are common, deadly, and often spread to multiple buildings because everything is wood, everything is dry, and everything is crammed too close together. When a fire starts, there's no time, no fire alarm, no sprinkler system, no clear exits. The stairwell fills with smoke immediately. Windows are too small or too frozen to escape through. People on upper floors are trapped. Fire brigades arrive eventually, but by then the building is fully involved and they're more interested in preventing spread to neighbouring structures than in rescuing anyone inside. Survivors lose everything: clothes, furniture, food, shelter. And then they move into another tenement exactly like the one that burned. Because what else can they do? Some families can't afford a stove at all. They rely on their neighbour's generosity, crowding into a friend's room during the coldest hours. Or they simply endure. They wrap themselves in every scrap of fabric they own and wait for spring. Children develop frostbite on their fingers and toes. The tissue dies, turns black, and eventually falls off. These children will grow into adults missing parts of themselves, permanent souvenirs of winters they survived but didn't escape unscathed. There's a social hierarchy even in heating. If you have a stove and can afford regular coal, you're practically middle class by 5-point standards. If you have a stove but burn scavenged wood, you're average. If you share a stove with the room next door through a back-to-back arrangement, you're poor. If you have no heat source at all, you're at the bottom, and your survival is less likely than a coin flip. The wealthy uptown have servants whose entire job is managing fires. They keep multiple fireplaces burning all day. They have coal delivered and stored in proper bins. Their biggest heating complaint is that one parlour is slightly cooler than another. They've never made the choice between eating and heating. They've never calculated whether their children's lives are worth a bushel of coal. They've never sat in a smoke-filled room debating whether suffocation or freezing is the preferable death. But you have. You make these calculations every day. You decide how much fuel to burn, knowing that using it now means having less tomorrow. You position children closest to the stove and hope the warmth reaches them. You bank the fire at night, covering the coals with ash to keep them alive until morning so you don't waste matches relighting it. You've become an expert in extracting maximum heat from minimum fuel, a skill that's impressive but shouldn't need to exist. And when the stove finally does provide warmth, when the room reaches a temperature that could charitably be called not actively freezing, when you can remove one layer of clothing and still feel your fingers, there's a moment of profound relief. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, you take a breath that doesn't hurt. For a brief window, maybe an hour or two, you're not suffering, you're just existing, and in 5 points in winter, just existing without active misery counts as a good day. The stove will go cold again soon, the fuel will run out, the smoke will linger, but for now, In this moment, you're warm, and you'll take it. Your wardrobe consists of exactly what you're wearing right now. One dress, one shirt, one pair of pants, all made of rough wool or cotton that hasn't been washed in months. Washing clothes in winter means hauling frozen water, heating it over your precious fire, scrubbing by hand, and then hanging garments to dry in a room that's already freezing. So most people don't bother. Instead, you just layer on more clothing, one piece on top of another, until you're wearing every item you own simultaneously. By February, your clothes have formed a kind of protective crust. Part fabric, part dirt, part body oil. Fashion? Never heard of her. Let's start with the basics. If you're a woman, you're wearing a shift, a long, loose cotton or linen undergarment that serves as your only barrier between skin and the rough wool dress on top. This shift hasn't been washed since October. It's yellowish grey, stiff with sweat and dirt, and has achieved a texture somewhere between fabric and cardboard. Over this goes your dress, probably made of coarse wool, dyed a dark colour that won't show stains. Not that it matters. Everything shows stains at this point. The dress has been mended so many times that it is difficult to identify which parts are original fabric and which are patches from other garments that died honourable deaths. If you're a man, you've got a shirt, probably cotton or wool, and a pair of trousers held up by rope or suspenders if you're fancy. The shirt has no collar. Those are for people with social aspirations and laundry facilities. Your pants are stiff enough to stand up on their own, which is convenient because it means you don't have to fold them at night. You just lean them in the corner and they wait there like faithful servants until morning. Everyone wears wool because wool is magic. It's one of the few fabrics that retain some insulating properties even when wet, which is good because you're always at least a little damp from sweat, rain, snow, or the general humidity of living in a room with 8 people breathing. The downside, wool is itchy, aggressively, relentlessly itchy. You've got a rash on your neck, your wrists, your waist. Anywhere the wool makes direct contact. You scratch constantly, which makes the rash worse, which makes you scratch more. It's a circle of discomfort with no exit. Layering is the key to winter survival, which means you're wearing multiple shirts, multiple skirts, multiple everything. Women might wear 2 or 3 petticoats under their dresses, each one adding insulation and bulk. You walk like the Michelin man's impoverished cousin. Bending over is difficult. Sitting down requires planning. You've got so many layers that you're not entirely sure what's underneath anymore. There might be a shirt from 2 winters ago that you've just been wearing continuously under everything else. You'll find out in spring. Maybe. Children's clothing is even more depressing. They wear adult clothes that have been cut down and resized, which means nothing fits properly. Sleeves are too long, so they're rolled up. Pants drag on the ground, soaking up street filth like textile sponges. Everything is held together with pins, ties, and optimism. Children grow, but clothes don't, so there's a constant state of too tight discomfort. Seams split, buttons pop off and are never replaced. Many children are dressed in what essentially amounts to layered rags, held together by the will of God. Shoes are the real luxury item. A decent pair of boots might cost a week's wages, which means most people in 5 Points make do with whatever they can afford or scavenge. Your shoes, if you have them, are leather. Or at least they used to be before the leather got so wet, dried out, got wet again, and finally achieved a consistency similar to tree bark. The soles are worn through in spots, which you've tried to patch with cardboard, but cardboard dissolves in snow, so you're constantly replacing it. Your feet are always wet. Always. You've forgotten what dry socks feel like, assuming you even have socks. Many people go barefoot, even in winter, because they literally have no choice. Children especially. Their feet grow too fast to justify the expense of shoes they'll outgrow in months. So they walk through snow, ice, and frozen mud with bare feet that turn purple, then white, then numb. Frostbite is so common that missing toes are barely worth mentioning. You'll see children limping through 5 Points missing parts of their feet, and nobody asks questions because everyone knows the answer. Winter. Outerwear is whatever you can get. A shawl, a blanket worn as a cloak, a man's coat that's been in the family for 20 years and has been worn by 3 generations. These outer layers are rarely removed, even indoors, because the cold is everywhere. You sleep in your coat, you eat in your coat, You're basically living in a wearable sleeping bag that smells like wet dog and failure. The dirt and grime on your clothes serve a purpose beyond just being gross. That layer of accumulated filth actually provides a thin barrier of insulation. It fills in the gaps in the weave of the fabric, making it less permeable to wind. It's basically natural weatherproofing, achieved through months of not bathing and not washing clothes. You're marinating in your own protective coating. Is it disgusting? Absolutely. Does it help you survive? Also, yes. Welcome to the moral compromises of poverty. Your clothes also host a thriving ecosystem. Lice live in the seams of your garments, tiny vampires that bite you constantly and lay eggs in your fabric. You can't see them easily, but you can feel them. That constant itching isn't just the wool, it's also the livestock you're carrying around. Body lice, head lice, pubic lice. You've got the complete collection. Delousing requires hot water, soap, and the ability to boil your clothes, none of which you have access to, so the lice stay. They're part of the family now. Fleas are another permanent resident. They hop from person to person, biting indiscriminately, and they thrive in the warmth created by layered clothing. You'll be standing in the street and suddenly feel something bite your ankle, and you know exactly what it is. Bedbugs live in the seams and hems, coming out at night to feed. Your clothing isn't just protection from the elements, it's also a mobile apartment complex for parasites. Mending clothes is a constant activity. Every night by candlelight or firelight, someone is stitching up torn seams, patching holes with scraps from even more worn-out garments, or trying to reinforce areas that are about to give out. Thread is expensive, so you save every scrap. When clothes finally disintegrate beyond repair, they're not thrown away. They become cleaning rags. Stuffing for pillows or mattresses, bandages or patches for other clothes. Nothing is wasted. Every fibre serves multiple purposes before it finally disintegrates into dust. The colour of clothes in 5 points tends toward dark browns, greys and blacks. Not as a fashion statement, but because these colours hide stains. Not that you're trying to look clean. Everyone knows you're not clean. But there's a psychological comfort in not seeing every single stain on your person. Light-coloured fabric would show every spill, every smudge, every drop of street mud. Within a week, white would be grey. Within a month, grey would be black. So you start with dark colours and work your way darker. There's no such thing as seasonal wardrobes. You don't pack away your winter clothes and bring out summer ones. You wear the same clothes year-round, just with more or fewer layers. In summer, you're still wearing wool because it's all you have, sweating through your dress or shirt, developing heat rashes and chafing. In winter, you add everything you own on top. You're either too hot or too cold, never comfortable, always adjusting layers in a futile attempt to find thermal equilibrium. Washing clothes, when it absolutely must be done, is an all-day ordeal. You haul water up multiple flights of stairs, multiple trips, until you have enough to fill a tub. You heat it on your stove, using precious fuel. You scrub the clothes by hand against a washboard, or just against each other, trying to loosen the embedded dirt. The water turns black immediately. Your hands go raw from the cold water and the harsh lye soap, if you have soap. If you don't, you just use hot water and hope friction does the job. Then comes drying, which in winter is nearly impossible. Wet clothes hung in your freezing room will freeze solid before they dry. You can hang them near the stove, but they'll take days to dry, filling your room with damp, wool-scented steam. Or you can hang them outside where they'll freeze immediately and stay frozen until spring. Some women hang wet clothes on lines strung across the room and just live under a canopy of frozen laundry, dodging icy shirts and stiff petticoats like it's an obstacle course. The wealthy uptown change clothes daily. They have wardrobes full of options. They send their laundry out to be washed by servants or professional laundresses. They wear clean, pressed garments that smell like soap and starch. Their biggest clothing concern is whether the season's fashions suit them. They'll never know what it's like to wear the same dress for 4 months straight, to sleep in clothes so dirty they could stand up on their own, or to make the choice between freezing and itching. But you know. You live it. Every day you put on your crusty, lice-infested, ill-fitting layers and face the world. Your clothes don't make you look good. They make you survive. And in 5 points, survival is the only fashion statement that matters. Let's talk hydration. You're thirsty, and you need water. Bad news. There's no running water in your building. You have to walk several blocks to the nearest public pump, which services hundreds of families and fill whatever container you've brought, usually a wooden bucket or a chipped ceramic jug. Now here's the fun part. The water is contaminated. The pump draws from wells that are near overflowing privies, leaking sewage and decomposing animals. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, they're all in there, waiting. But you're thirsty, so you drink it anyway. What choice do you have? The nearest public pump is 3 blocks away, which doesn't sound far until you remember you have to make this trip multiple times a day carrying heavy containers. In winter, the walk is treacherous. Icy streets, frozen ruts, the constant risk of slipping and spilling your hard-won water all over the ground. In summer, it's just exhausting. And you're competing with hundreds of other families for access to the same pump, so there's always a line. Always. You stand there with your bucket, waiting your turn, while children whine and neighbours gossip and everyone pretends not to notice that the water coming out of the pump has a suspicious colour. The pump itself is a cast-iron hand pump, the kind you have to work manually, pushing the handle up and down until water starts flowing from the spout. It's hard work, especially in winter when the mechanism freezes and you have to prime it by pouring a little water down first, just to get it moving. Sometimes the pump is frozen solid and won't work at all, which means you have to try another pump even farther away, or melt snow, which introduces its own set of problems like what was in the snow before it became snow. The water that comes out is not what you'd call appealing. On a good day it's cloudy, on a bad day it's brown, on a really bad day it has visible particles floating in it, sediment, organic matter, things you don't want to identify. It smells vaguely of sewage and something metallic. You try not to think about where it came from, or what it passed through on its way to your bucket. Ignorance isn't bliss, but it's easier than acknowledging that you're basically drinking from an open sewer. The wells that feed these pumps are shallow, usually only 10 to 20 feet deep, which means they're pulling water from the same aquifer that's been contaminated by privies, cesspools, and the general seepage of 5 Points collective waste. The collect pond, remember, was filled in with garbage and dirt, and everything built on top of it is slowly sinking and leaking. The groundwater underneath 5 Points is essentially a disease soup, and every time you pump, you're ladling out a fresh bowl. Carrying water back to your tenement is its own ordeal. You're hauling 20 or 30 pounds of liquid up 4 flights of narrow, slippery stairs. If you trip, you've just wasted 30 minutes of work and you get to go back and do it again. Children are often sent to fetch water because their labour is free, but children are also clumsy and weak, so they spill a lot. It's not uncommon to see a crying child standing in a puddle of spilled water on the stairs, knowing they're about to be yelled at or worse. Once you get the water home, you have to store it in whatever containers you have. A bucket, a barrel if you're lucky, a ceramic jug, maybe a tin can. Nothing is sealed or covered properly because you don't have lids, which means dust, insects and airborne filth settle into your drinking water constantly. That fly that's been crawling over the chamber pot, it's now doing laps in your water bucket. Bon appétit. Nobody understands germ theory yet. The idea that tiny invisible organisms cause disease won't be widely accepted for another few decades. Right now, people believe in miasma theory, the idea that bad air and foul odours cause illness. So when people get sick from the water, they blame the smell of 5 Points, not the actual bacterial content of what they're drinking. This means no one connects the dots between the contaminated well and the cholera outbreak. They just think God is punishing them, or the air is bad, or they have weak constitutions. Cholera is the big killer. It spreads through contaminated water and hits fast. You're fine in the morning, experiencing violent diarrhea and vomiting by afternoon, and dead by nightfall. Your body loses fluid so quickly that you become dehydrated, your skin turns blue-grey, your eyes sink into your skull, and you die in agony. Cholera outbreaks sweep through 5 Points regularly, killing hundreds. In 1849, there was an outbreak that killed over 5,000 people in New York City, with 5 Points being hit especially hard, and still, people drink from the same pumps because what else are they going to do? Die of thirst instead? Typhoid is another waterborne disease, though it kills more slowly. You get a sustained fever, intense headaches, weakness and stomach problems. If you survive the initial infection, you might be left with permanent complications. If you don't survive, you die in bed after weeks of suffering, your family watching helplessly because there's no treatment. Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, won't come onto the scene for another few decades, but she'll be a reminder of how easily disease spreads through contaminated food and water handled by infected people. Dysentery is the constant companion of bad water. It's less immediately fatal than cholera, but still miserable. Severe diarrhea, cramps, fever. You're stuck running to the outhouse every hour, losing fluids and nutrients, getting weaker. Children especially suffer from dysentery. Their small bodies can't handle the fluid loss. They waste away over weeks, getting thinner and more listless until they just stop waking up. Some people try to make the water safer by boiling it, but that requires fuel, which costs money, and time, which is in short supply when you're working 12-hour days. Most people just drink it straight from the bucket and hope for the best. It's a daily lottery where the prize for losing is death, and the prize for winning is just not dying today. Not exactly motivating odds, but you play anyway. Beer and alcohol are actually safer to drink than water because the brewing process involves boiling, which kills bacteria. This is why even children drink weak beer or cider. It's not because 1850s parents were irresponsible. It's because alcohol was legitimately safer than water. So you start your day with a beer, drink beer with lunch, and have beer with dinner. You're not drunk. The alcohol content is low. But you're definitely not sober either. You're just existing in a perpetual state of mild beer buzzing because it's better than cholera. The wealthy uptown are starting to get access to the Croton Aqueduct system, completed in 1842, which brings clean water from upstate reservoirs into the city through pipes and aqueducts. It's a marvel of engineering, and it transforms life for those who can access it. They have water delivered directly to their homes through pipes. They can bathe regularly, wash clothes, drink clean water, but the Croton system doesn't reach 5 points. The infrastructure stops at the neighbourhoods where people can afford to pay for connections. 5 points is left with its contaminated wells and public pumps. There's a cruel irony in the fact that Manhattan is an island surrounded by water, yet its poorest residents are dying of thirst and waterborne diseases. The Hudson and East Rivers flow on either side of 5 points, but that water is even more contaminated than the wells, full of industrial waste, sewage and ship bilge. Nobody in their right mind drinks river water unless they're actively trying to die. Winter brings its own water challenges. The pump freezes, the water in your bucket freezes, your lips crack from dehydration because drinking ice is difficult, and melting it requires fuel. Some people eat snow, which is only slightly less contaminated than the well water because it's absorbed smoke, coal dust and whatever particulates are floating through 5 Points' charming air. Snow from the street is definitely contaminated with horse manure and human waste, so you try to collect it from rooftops. But even that's questionable. Washing anything with contaminated water is an exercise in futility. You're essentially rinsing dirt with more dirt. Washing vegetables means coating them in bacteria. Washing dishes means spreading disease from one meal to the next. Washing your body means bathing in the same microbes you're trying to remove. It's a closed loop of contamination with no exit. The pump becomes a social gathering place, despite its role as a disease vector. Women meet there to gossip while waiting their turn. Children play nearby. News spreads through the pump line faster than cholera. Someone's husband got arrested. Someone's baby died. Someone found work on the docks. The pump is 5 Points social media, only instead of scrolling, you're standing in sewage-flavoured water puddles, and instead of likes, you're collecting infectious diseases. Nobody talks about the cognitive dissonance of knowing the water is killing people, but drinking it anyway. What would be the point? Acknowledging it doesn't change anything. You can't will clean water into existence. You can't afford to move somewhere with better infrastructure. You can't stop being thirsty. So you drink and you hope and you watch neighbours die and you wonder if today is the day your lottery number comes up. The crazy thing is that people survive. Not everyone, not even most people, but some. The human body is remarkably resilient. You develop some immunity to the low-level pathogens you're constantly exposed to. Your gut flora adapts. You become a walking immune system achievement, having survived water that would hospitalise a modern person within hours. It's not a superpower you wanted, but it's the one you've got. Every glass of water is a reminder that your life is worth less than infrastructure. That society has decided your neighbourhood isn't worth investing in. That clean water is a privilege for those who can pay, not a right for everyone. You're not stupid. You understand exactly what's happening. You're just powerless to change it. So you drink your contaminated water, You haul your heavy buckets, you survive another day, and you try not to think about what's swimming around in your stomach. Because thinking about it won't make the water cleaner, it'll just make you thirsty. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a hunk of stale bread, and maybe some weak coffee made from burnt grain because actual coffee beans are too expensive. Lunch might be a potato. Dinner could be the same potato boiled this time. Meat is a luxury saved for special occasions, and when you do get it, it's often spoiled or stretched with sawdust by dishonest butchers. Milk, if you can afford it, is watered down and possibly laced with chalk or plaster to make it look thicker. Fresh vegetables, in winter, in 5 Points, you'd have better luck finding a unicorn. Let's start with bread, the cornerstone of your diet and quite possibly the only reliable thing in your life besides misery. A loaf costs about 5 cents, which represents a significant chunk of your daily wages. The bread itself is dense, heavy, and made from the cheapest flour available, usually a mix of wheat, rye, and whatever else the baker could bulk it up with. Sawdust is common. Chalk dust adds weight. Some bakers add plaster of Paris to make the bread whiter, because customers associate white bread with quality, even though they're basically eating wool material. The bread you buy on Monday is still being eaten on Saturday because you can't afford to buy fresh daily. By midweek, it's hard enough to use as a weapon. You have to soak it in water or the weak coffee substitute just to make it chewable. Children learn to gnaw on stale bread like puppies with bones, working a piece in their mouth for 20 minutes until it finally softens enough to swallow. Your jaw muscles are incredibly strong from all this aggressive bread consumption. Silver lining, you could probably crack walnuts with your molars. That coffee-like beverage you're drinking, it's not coffee. Real coffee is imported and expensive, priced for people who have furniture and hope. What you have is roasted grain, wheat, rye or barley, burned until it's dark, ground up, and steeped in hot water to create a bitter brown liquid that's coffee-adjacent in colour only. Some vendors sell coffee that's actually made from roasted chicory root, acorns or dried peas. It's warm, it's wet, it's vaguely stimulating if you squint. That's the best you can say about it. Potatoes are your salvation and your curse. They're cheap, filling, and can be stored for months in a cool place, assuming you have a cool place that isn't also home to a family of rats. A bushel of potatoes might cost 50 cents and feed your family for a week. You boil them. You bake them in the ashes of your fire. You mash them with a little salt if you're feeling fancy. You eat them for breakfast, lunch and dinner, until you're so sick of potatoes that you'd rather eat your shoes. Except your shoes are probably more appetizing at this point. The Irish families in 5 Points have a particularly complicated relationship with potatoes. They came to America fleeing the potato famine, where the failure of the potato crop meant death by starvation for millions. Now they're in New York, still eating potatoes because it's all they can afford. The potato followed them across the ocean like a starchy ghost, a reminder of everything they fled and everything they can't escape. Meat is a fantasy item, the unicorn of the 5 Points diet. When you do manage to afford it, maybe once a month if you're lucky, it's not what you'd call premium cuts. You're buying scraps from the butcher, gristle, fat, organ meats that the wealthy won't touch, or salted pork that's been preserved so heavily it could survive a nuclear winter. The salt content is so high that after eating it, you're thirsty for 3 days. But it's meat, and meat means you're doing okay, at least for this week. The butchers in 5 Points are not regulated, inspected, or particularly concerned with your well-being. They sell whatever they can get away with. That's definitely beef you're buying, not horse. Probably. That pork definitely came from a pig, not a rat. Almost certainly. The meat is often spoiled, green around the edges, smelling distinctly of decay. Butchers just cut off the worst parts and sell the rest. You learn to cook meat very thoroughly, boiling it for hours until any bacteria have been bullied into submission. There's also the creative practice of meat adulteration. Dishonest butchers bulk up their sausages with breadcrumbs, sawdust or plaster. That ground beef, it's maybe 50% beef. The rest is anyone's guess. Organ meat gets ground up and sold as premium cuts. Sometimes you're buying meat from animals that died of disease rather than slaughter. There's no FDA, no health inspections, no consequences for selling contaminated food. Caveat emptor taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. Milk is another adventure in food safety violations. Fresh milk costs about 6 cents a quart, which is expensive, so most of what's sold in 5 Points is swill milk, produced by cows kept in filthy conditions in brewery cellars, fed exclusively on the hot mash left over from alcohol production. These cows are sick, malnourished, and producing milk that's thin, bluish, and nutritionally questionable. So the distributors water it down even more, then add chalk, plaster, or flour to make it white and thick again. Sometimes they add molasses for sweetness. You're basically drinking white paint with pretensions. The swill milk operations are notorious. Cows are packed into dark, unventilated basements, standing in their own waste, never seeing sunlight, fed nothing but brewery waste until they literally fall over dead. The milk they produce is so bad that it's killing children by the hundreds. Infant mortality rates in 5 Points are staggering, and contaminated milk is a major contributor. But it's cheap, and cheap matters more than safe when you're trying to feed a family on $1 a day. Vegetables are theoretically available but practically out of reach. In summer, you might find wilted cabbage, questionable carrots, or potatoes that aren't quite potatoes anymore. They're more like potato-shaped suggestions. These vegetables have been sitting in carts for days, accumulating street dust, fly eggs, and existential despair. In winter, fresh vegetables simply don't exist at your price point. Root vegetables are it. Potatoes, turnips, onions if you're splurging. Anything green is a distant memory. The produce sellers have their own tricks. Rotten spots are cut out and the rest is sold. Wilted lettuce is soaked in water to plump it up temporarily. Underripe fruit is sold as almost ready, which really means will never ripen and will give you a stomachache. Overripe fruit, brown and fermented, is sold at a discount. You buy it anyway because fruit is fruit, even if it's technically becoming alcohol. Eggs are available but risky. There's no refrigeration, so eggs sit at room temperature for weeks. You can't tell by looking whether an egg is fresh or rotten until you crack it open. Surprise rotten eggs are a regular occurrence, filling your room with sulfuric stench and ruining whatever you were trying to cook. The floating test, putting eggs in water to see if they float, helps, but it's not foolproof. You've become an expert at cracking eggs into a separate container first, just in case. Fish should be plentiful. You're on an island surrounded by water, and fresh fish is available, but again, not at prices you can afford. By the time fish reaches 5 Points markets, it's been sitting for days. The smell announces its presence from blocks away. The eyes are cloudy, the flesh is soft, and the whole thing is hours away from becoming biohazard. You buy it anyway, cook it thoroughly, and hope the salt and heat kill whatever's growing in there. Cheese is mostly imported and aged, which makes it relatively safe, but also expensive. What you can afford is the cheapest, oldest, hardest cheese available, the kind you have to shave with a knife because biting it would break your teeth. It tastes like concentrated salt and regret, but it's protein and it keeps forever, so into your diet it goes. There's a whole economy of street food vendors selling things of questionable origin. Hot corn, corn on the cob sold by young women from pushcarts, oysters sold from barrels because before pollution destroyed them, oysters were the cheap protein of working-class New York. Penny pies filled with mystery meat, roasted chestnuts in winter. These foods are hot, relatively filling, and you can buy them with pocket change, which makes them essential for people who don't have kitchens or time to cook. The grocers in 5 Points are not your friends. They sell on credit because nobody has cash, but they charge interest that would make a loan shark blush. You buy a week's worth of food on credit, and by the time you pay it off, you owe more than the food was worth. It's a debt trap disguised as a convenience, and if you can't pay, the grocer stops extending credit, and you either go hungry or find a different grocer willing to start the cycle over. Food poisoning is just part of life. You eat something that didn't agree with you, spend a day violently expelling it from both ends, and then get back to work because you can't afford to take time off. The line between normal stomach upset and actual disease that will kill you is blurry, so you just power through until either you feel better or you don't. Medical care costs money you don't have, so the strategy is just to survive and see what happens. Cooking is done on your tiny stove with minimal equipment. 1 pot, maybe 2. A pan if you're well off. Everything is boiled because boiling is simple and doesn't require skill or multiple dishes. You throw ingredients into a pot with water and cook them until they're soft enough to eat. Flavour is not the goal. Edibility is the goal. If it doesn't kill you, it's a successful meal. Children are perpetually hungry. They're growing, burning calories, just trying to stay warm, and never quite getting enough to eat. That hollow-eyed, thin look that you see in old photographs of 5 Points children, that's malnutrition. They're not starving in the dramatic sense. They're eating every day, but they're not getting proper nutrition. Protein, vitamins, minerals, all the things growing bodies need are in short supply. Kids develop rickets from lack of vitamin D, scurvy from lack of vitamin C, and general failure to thrive from lack of everything else. The wealthy uptown are eating oysters, Rockefeller, roasted meats, fresh fruits imported from across the world, and elaborate pastries. They have multiple courses at dinner. They throw away more food in a day than you eat in a week. Their dogs eat better than your children, and they'll never understand what it's like to go to bed hungry, to feed your kids bread and water and call it dinner, or to make a potato last 3 days because it's all you have. But you keep eating, keep surviving, keep finding ways to turn the cheapest, oldest, most questionable food into enough calories to make it to tomorrow. Your stomach is probably lined with iron at this point. You could eat things that would hospitalize a modern person. You've become a culinary survivor, an expert in making terrible food barely edible, and sometimes, on a good day, there's enough bread that everyone gets a full piece. And that counts as abundance. Time to talk about where you relieve yourself. Spoiler, it's not pleasant. Most tenements have a shared outhouse in the back courtyard, a wooden shack with a hole in a bench over a pit. In summer, it's a fly-infested horror show. In winter, it's frozen solid. The contents don't decompose, they just pile up and freeze into a monumental iceberg of human waste. Walking out there in the middle of the night when it's below zero, in the dark, through snow, just to sit on a frozen wooden seat, that's character building, or it's hell. Probably both. Let's start with the mathematics of misery. Your tenement building houses roughly 80 to 100 people across 5 floors. There are 2 outhouses in the back courtyard. 2. That's 1 toilet for every 40 to 50 people, which means you're sharing bathroom facilities with more people than a modern office building, except there's no cleaning crew and no running water. The wait times are legendary. Morning is peak hours, with lines of people hopping from foot to foot, clutching their stomachs, praying they make it in time. The outhouse itself is a masterpiece of minimal effort construction. 4 wooden walls, a slanted roof that leaks, a door that doesn't latch properly, and a wooden bench with a hole cut in it. No toilet paper. That's a luxury item that won't be widely available for another few decades. Instead, you use whatever's available. Old newspaper, corn cobs if you're rural adjacent, leaves in summer, or just your hand and hope you can wash it later. Most people opt for newspaper, which is rough, absorbent in an aggressive way, and occasionally gives you paper cuts in places you really don't want paper cuts. The pit beneath the outhouse is supposed to be cleaned out periodically by night soil men, workers who come in the middle of the night to shovel out the contents and haul them away. Supposed to be is doing a lot of work in that sentence. In reality, the pit is cleaned out maybe once or twice a year, if you're lucky, if the landlord pays for it, if the night soil men can be bothered. The rest of the time, it just fills up, and up, and up, until the pile rises dangerously close to the bench level and people start aiming very carefully. In winter, the outhouse becomes a geological formation. The waste freezes in layers like sedimentary rock, creating a historical record of everyone's digestive activities going back months. It's a fecal fossil record. The smell is somewhat muted by the cold, which is the only positive thing you can say about the situation. But the cold also means the wooden seat is frozen, and sitting on it is like pressing your bare skin against ice. You perch on the edge, trying to minimize contact, tensing every muscle, trying to finish as quickly as humanly possible. The door doesn't provide much privacy. The gaps between the boards are wide enough to see through, and the door barely closes anyway. You can hear everything happening in the outhouse next to yours, and trust me, you don't want to. There's no light, so nighttime visits are done entirely by feel and hope. You shuffle through the dark courtyard, hand outstretched, praying you don't trip over garbage or other obstacles, find the outhouse by touch, and then conduct your business in complete darkness. If you're smart, you bring a candle, but open flame plus methane buildup plus wooden structure equals occasional outhouse fires, which are exactly as horrifying as they sound. The walk to the outhouse at 2 a.m. in January is an epic journey. You wake up with urgent biological need. You're already cold because your room is freezing. Now you have to leave the relative warmth of your bed, navigate through a room full of sleeping bodies without stepping on anyone, descend 4 flights of dark, icy stairs without falling, cross a courtyard covered in frozen mud and snow, and enter a wooden box that's somehow colder than the outdoors. Every step of this journey makes you question your life choices. Some people, quite reasonably, decide this journey is not worth it. They use chamber pots, ceramic or metal pots kept under the bed or in a corner of the room. You do your business in the pot, and then in the morning you have to empty it. Where? Well, the proper procedure is to carry it down to the outhouse and dump it in the pit. The actual procedure that most people follow is to open the window and throw the contents into the air shaft or the street below. Remember that charming tradition of yelling "Gardy-loo" before dumping chamber pots out windows in medieval Edinburgh. That tradition is alive and well in 5 Points, except nobody bothers with the warning anymore. You just chuck and hope. The courtyard behind your tenement is a nightmare landscape. Besides the outhouses, it's filled with garbage, ashes from stoves, broken furniture, dead animals in various states of decay, and puddles of unidentifiable liquid that freeze into treacherous ice slicks in winter. This is where children play because there's nowhere else to go. This is where laundry is hung. This is where neighbours gather to gossip. The outhouse is just one horror among many in this crowded, unsanitary space. Disease spreads from these outhouses like wildfire. The pits leak. Of course they leak. They're just holes in the ground, and 5 Points is built on filled-in swampland that's perpetually damp. The contents seep into the surrounding soil, contaminating the groundwater, which feeds the wells, which supply the pumps, which fill your drinking water bucket. It's a closed loop of contamination. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, they all trace back to this fundamental failure of sanitation. Flies in summer are biblical in their abundance. They breed in the outhouse pits by the thousands, then come into your home, land on your food, walk across your sleeping child's face. Each fly is a tiny disease vector, carrying bacteria from human waste directly to your dinner plate. You swat at them constantly, but for every fly you kill, 10 more take its place. The flies are winning. For women, the outhouse situation is especially degrading. Menstruation means dealing with rags that have to be washed and reused in a time when discussing such matters is taboo and resources for managing them are minimal. Privacy is non-existent. Safety is a concern. The courtyard at night is dark, and women going to the outhouse alone are vulnerable to assault. Many women hold it as long as physically possible to avoid nighttime trips, which leads to its own health problems. Children often don't make it to the outhouse in time. When you're 4 years old and the outhouse is down 4 flights of stairs and across a courtyard, and you really have to go right now, accidents happen. Chamber pots help, but even those require coordination that small children don't always have. So there's just a constant background smell of urine in every tenement, because somewhere a child has had an accident that can't be properly cleaned up. Some buildings have privy vaults in the basement instead of outdoor outhouses. These are worse. They're essentially cesspool pits directly under the building, accessible through trapdoors or basement openings. They fill with waste from multiple floors, and when they overflow, which they do regularly, sewage backs up into the basement and sometimes into the first-floor apartments. Living on the ground floor means sometimes waking up to find your home flooding with raw sewage. The smell alone is enough to make you pass out. Actually living in it is indescribable. The city government is supposed to regulate this situation. There are laws about how many people can share a privy, how often pits must be emptied, how far privies should be from wells. These laws are ignored. Landlords don't comply because compliance costs money. Inspectors don't enforce because 5 Points is too far gone to save. Politicians don't care because the people living in 5 Points can't vote. Many are recent immigrants who aren't citizens yet. Or they're too poor to meet property requirements for voting, so nothing changes. Occasionally, someone falls into an outhouse pit. Yes, really. The wooden planks rot and give way, or a child leans too far over, or someone slips in the dark. Falling into a pit full of human waste is usually fatal, not from drowning but from infection, or simply from the trauma and shock. Bodies are sometimes not recovered immediately because no one wants to go in there. It's one of the most undignified deaths imaginable, and it happens regularly enough that people know to be careful around the edges. There's a class of workers called night soil men. or gong farmers who empty the privies. This is considered the absolute lowest job available, below even rag picking and bone collecting. They work at night so the genteel classes don't have to witness the process. They shovel human waste into carts, haul it away, and dump it wherever they can, often just into the rivers or vacant lots. They're paid barely anything and die young from disease and exposure. Their life expectancy is probably lower than yours, which is saying something. In very cold weather, the outhouse becomes temporarily unusable because the pile freezes so solid that adding to it becomes impossible. You're essentially trying to go to the bathroom on a frozen monument. Nothing penetrates. It just sits on top, adding to the pile, until spring thaw turns the entire thing into a liquefied horror show that overflows the pit and floods the courtyard. Spring in 5 Points doesn't smell like flowers. It smells like 3 months of accumulated frozen waste suddenly melting all at once. Some enterprising tenement dwellers create their own solutions. They'll use buckets in the hallways, creating communal piss buckets that overflow and leak through the floors to the apartments below. They'll designate a corner of the cellar as an unofficial toilet area. They'll use the alley beside the building. None of these solutions are better than the outhouse. They're just more convenient, which tells you everything about how bad the outhouse actually is. The psychological impact of this level of unsanitation is hard to measure but impossible to ignore. You lose dignity. You lose the sense that your body's functions can be managed privately and hygienically. You're reduced to animalistic survival, doing what you must where you can. Children grow up thinking this is normal, that everyone in the world shares a toilet with 50 people, that relieving yourself is always accompanied by cold, smell, and shame. Modern people complain about public restrooms. Airport bathrooms, gas station toilets. You'd laugh if you had the energy. Those bathrooms have running water, soap, toilet paper, lights, locks, and sanitation. They're cleaned daily, sometimes hourly. They're heated in winter. They're private. They're palaces compared to your frozen wooden box of horrors squatting in a courtyard in 5 Points. But you use it anyway, because the alternative is worse. You make the midnight trek through the snow. You sit on the frozen seat, you finish quickly, and you trudge back to your freezing room, grateful for small mercies like not falling through the rotten boards into the pit below. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. Welcome to indoor plumbing's evil twin. Outdoor plumbing that's trying to kill you. You haven't had a real bath since October. Bathing in winter requires heating water, which requires fuel, which costs money you don't have. Plus, there's a widespread belief that bathing in cold weather opens your pores and lets disease in, so most people just don't. They might wipe down with a damp rag occasionally, but full body washing is out of the question. By midwinter, everyone smells. You smell. Your neighbours smell. The entire building smells like a locker room that caught fire. But at least you're not alone in your filth. The concept of regular bathing is, frankly, a luxury for people who have multiple sets of clothes, unlimited hot water, and time that isn't consumed by not dying. You have none of these things. Your last proper bath happened months ago, probably in summer when you could heat water without feeling guilty about the fuel cost, and when air drying afterward wouldn't give you pneumonia. That bath was conducted in a wooden tub, maybe 2 feet in diameter, filled with a few inches of water that had to be heated bucket by bucket on your stove. The whole process took hours and used up fuel you could barely afford. So yeah, you're not doing that again until the weather warms up. The medical wisdom of the 1850s actively discourages winter bathing. Doctors and popular health guides warn that washing removes the body's natural protective oils, leaving you vulnerable to disease. Water opens the pores, they say, creating pathways for miasma, bad air, to enter your body and make you sick. This is completely wrong, of course, but nobody knows that yet. Germ theory won't be widely accepted for decades. So people genuinely believe that staying dirty is healthier than getting clean. It's not laziness or ignorance. It's following the best medical advice available, which happens to be terrible. What you do instead is spot cleaning. Maybe once a week, if you're feeling ambitious and have access to water, you'll dampen a rag and wipe down the parts of your body that are most offensive: face, neck, armpits, and other relevant areas. This is done in your freezing room, quickly, while trying not to expose too much skin to the cold air. The rag is cold because heating water for a simple wipe down seems wasteful. You shiver through the process, scrubbing half-heartedly, removing the top layer of grime while leaving the foundational dirt intact. It's like dusting a shelf. You're just redistributing the filth, not actually cleaning anything. Your hair hasn't been washed since last summer either. Women with long hair keep it pinned up under caps or wrapped in scarves, partly for warmth and partly to hide the grease. By February, your hair has achieved a texture somewhere between yarn and leather. It's stiff with accumulated oil, sweat, and the general atmospheric grime of 5 points. You could probably style it into any shape and it would hold. The Victorian era won't invent dry shampoo, but you've essentially created your own version through neglect. Your scalp itches constantly, a combination of natural oils, dirt, and the lice that have taken up permanent residence. Speaking of lice, they're thriving. Head lice love dirty hair. They lay eggs in the greasy strands, creating nits that are nearly impossible to remove without fine-toothed combs and patience, neither of which you have. You scratch your head constantly, sometimes drawing blood, which then scabs over and gets infected. Some people try remedies like kerosene or lye applied directly to the scalp, which kills the lice but also burns the skin and occasionally catches fire if you get too close to a candle. The cure is often worse than the problem. Body odour in 5 points isn't just noticeable, it's a physical presence. Every enclosed space reeks of unwashed humans, stale sweat, and the particular tang of bodies that haven't been clean in months. The smell layers itself into fabrics, into wood, into your own nose until you stop noticing it. Olfactory fatigue is real and merciful. After a few weeks you become nose-blind to your own stench. You only notice it when you've been outside in fresh air and come back into your tenement, where the smell hits you like a wall made of feet. Public bathhouses do exist in New York, but they're uptown. They cost money, and they require you to have time for leisure activities, which you don't. A visit to a bathhouse might cost 10 or 15 cents, which is a significant expense when you're trying to feed a family on $1 a day. Plus, getting to the bathhouse requires walking through the city in your current state of filth, taking a bath, and then walking back through 5 points to your dirty tenement where you'll immediately reaccumulate all the grime you just removed. The cost-benefit analysis doesn't pencil out. Some charitable organisations and missions offer free bathing facilities for the poor, but they come with conditions. You have to listen to a sermon first. You have to prove you're deserving of charity. You have to endure the pitying looks of middle-class reformers who've decided you need saving. The shame of accepting charity often outweighs the benefit of being clean. Plus, these facilities are crowded, the water is shared among multiple bathers, and you're essentially bathing in communal human soup, which might actually make you dirtier. Children are especially neglected in the hygiene department. Parents can barely manage their own minimal cleaning routines, let alone supervise children's bathing. Kids run around with dirt-caked faces, hands that haven't been washed in weeks, and clothing that's stiff with accumulated grime. Their natural kid smell, that combination of sweat, dirt and outdoor activity, is amplified by the complete absence of soap and water. They're basically feral in terms of cleanliness, and nobody has the time or resources to change that. Teeth are another casualty of the no-bathing philosophy. Toothbrushes exist but are expensive and considered somewhat elite. Most people in 5 points clean their teeth, if at all, by rubbing them with a cloth or their finger, maybe with some salt or charcoal powder if they're fancy. This does exactly nothing to prevent tooth decay. By age 30, you're missing several teeth. By 40, you might have more gaps than teeth. Oral hygiene is a lost cause, and everyone just accepts that their breath smells like something died and was reincarnated as a worse smell. Your skin develops a protective layer of dirt and oil that's almost like a second epidermis. This layer is greyish-brown, fills in wrinkles, and gives everyone a uniform dingy appearance. You can actually see the tide lines where clothing ends and skin begins, slightly cleaner stripes where fabric has rubbed away some of the surface grime. Your hands are the worst, permanently stained by work, dirt ground so deeply into the creases of your palms that it looks like elaborate henna tattoos. No amount of scrubbing will remove it at this point. It's decorative dirt. Rashes and skin conditions are rampant. Without regular washing, your skin can't breathe or shed dead cells properly. You develop patches of dermatitis, fungal infections between your toes and in other warm, moist areas, and mysterious itchy spots that might be eczema or might be something you picked up from a contaminated surface. There's no way to tell and no point in worrying about it. You just scratch and carry on. The smell of 5 Points in winter is complex and layered. There's the base note of unwashed human bodies, the middle note of wood smoke and coal dust, and the top note of frozen sewage. Add in the smell of wet wool, rotting food, animal waste from the pigs and rats, and the general mustiness of buildings that are damp and never fully dry out, and you've created an olfactory experience that would make a modern person's eyes water. But you're used to it. You live in it. You are it. Women face additional challenges. Menstruation means dealing with rags that need to be washed and reused, but washing requires hot water and privacy, both of which are scarce. Many women just wear the same rags multiple times without washing, or wash them in cold water, which doesn't actually clean them. This leads to infections, rashes, and a smell that's distinctive and impossible to mask. Nobody talks about it because Victorian sensibilities forbid discussing women's bodily functions, but everyone knows. The smell gives it away. There's a social hierarchy even in filth. The working poor who have indoor jobs, shopgirls, clerks, factory workers, can maintain slightly higher standards of cleanliness because they're not doing physical labour outdoors. The truly destitute, dock workers, construction labourers, street sweepers, are covered in the honest dirt of hard work and have neither time nor resources to address it. At the very bottom are the homeless and utterly desperate, who might not have changed clothes or washed in months, their bodies encrusted with layers of filth that have fossilised into armour. Spring will bring its own cleaning challenges. When the weather warms up enough to consider bathing, you'll have months of accumulated grime to remove. That first bath of the season is archaeological, revealing skin colours you'd forgotten you had, uncovering body parts that were hidden under layers of dirt. The water turns black immediately. You'll need multiple rinses to get anywhere close to clean. It's a project, not a bath. Some people try to mask their smell with what passes for perfume, usually cheap cologne bought from street vendors, or homemade concoctions involving flowers, herbs, or alcohol. This doesn't cover the smell so much as create a new, more complex smell. Now, you don't just smell like unwashed human. You smell like unwashed human trying to cover it up with lavender water. It's arguably worse. The wealthy uptown bathe regularly, even in winter. They have servants to heat and haul water. They have indoor plumbing being installed in their homes. They have proper bathrooms with tubs, soap and towels. They change their undergarments daily. Their biggest hygiene concern is whether their bathwater is the right temperature. They'll never understand what it's like to go months without bathing, to wear the same clothes continuously until they can stand up on their own, or to accept that being clean is a luxury you simply can't afford. But every now and then you fantasize about it. A hot bath, real soap, clean clothes afterward, hair that doesn't itch, skin that doesn't have a grey tint. You imagine feeling truly clean, just once, and how good that would feel. It's a simple dream, really. Not wealth or fame or even comfort. Just clean. Just once. Until then, you've got your damp rag, your olfactory fatigue, and the knowledge that everyone around you is just as dirty as you are. Misery loves company, and in 5 Points, company is never in short supply. You're all in this filth together, literally. Spring can't come soon enough, but even when it does, clean will be relative. If you have kids in 5 Points, they're not getting a childhood. They're getting a survival challenge. Children as young as 5 or 6 are working, selling newspapers, shining shoes, picking through trash for anything valuable. They're wearing thin, ill-fitting clothes, often barefoot even in snow because shoes are expensive and they'll just outgrow them anyway. Many don't survive. Infant mortality is staggering. Diseases like measles, whooping cough and scarlet fever tear through tenements like wildfire. Parents bury children in mass graves because individual plots cost money. It's bleak, it's heartbreaking, and it's daily life. Let's start with the babies, because their odds are the worst. If you give birth in 5 Points, your baby has roughly a 50-50 chance of seeing their 5th birthday. That's not exaggeration. That's statistics. Half of all children born in the slums don't make it to age 5. The causes are varied. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, exposure to cold, or simply the mysterious condition that doctors call failure to thrive, which is code for, we don't know why this baby is dying, but poverty probably isn't helping. Childbirth itself is dangerous for both mother and child. There are no hospitals for poor women, no sterile delivery rooms, no trained obstetricians. You give birth in your tenement room, attended by a midwife if you can afford one, or by female neighbours if you can't. The room is cold, the conditions unsanitary, and complications can be fatal. Many women die in childbirth or shortly after from infection. Many babies die during delivery or within days from conditions that would be easily treatable in the future. Each pregnancy is a roll of dice, and the house always has the advantage. Assuming the baby survives birth, they enter a world determined to kill them. They're swaddled in whatever cloth is available, old shirts, rags, scraps of wool. They sleep in their mother's arms because there's no separate cradle or crib. Babies need warmth, and the only reliable source is body heat. Mothers keep infants tucked inside their clothing against their skin, sharing warmth directly. This works unless the mother is sick, exhausted, or malnourished herself, which is often. Feeding babies is its own crisis. If a mother can breastfeed, that's ideal. Breast milk is free, safe, and nutritionally complete. But mothers who are starving themselves can't produce enough milk. Their bodies prioritise their own survival over milk production. So babies go hungry, becoming weak, susceptible to disease, failing to gain weight. Some women try to supplement with cow's milk, but remember the swill milk situation. Contaminated milk kills babies by the hundreds. Infants develop diarrhea, become dehydrated, and die within days. For mothers who can't breastfeed at all, due to illness, death, or having to work, alternatives are grim. There's no formula. Wet nurses exist, but cost money. Some women feed babies a mixture called pap, made from bread soaked in water or milk, which provides almost no nutrition. Babies fed on pap develop rickets, scurvy, and general wasting. They become hollow-eyed and skeletal, their growth stunted permanently if they survive at all. Toddlers face different dangers. They're mobile but lack judgment, which means they're constantly getting into things that can hurt them. The stove burns them. The stairs trip them. The contaminated water sickens them. They put everything in their mouths, and including things that are definitely not food. Paint chips, coal dust, insects. Lead poisoning from paint and pipes causes developmental delays and behavioural problems that won't be understood for decades. By age 5 or 6, children are expected to contribute economically. Childhood as a protected period of play and education is a middle-class luxury. Poor children work. Boys become newsies, standing on street corners in all weather, shouting headlines, selling papers for pennies. They become bootblacks, carrying their shoeshine boxes through the city, kneeling in snow and mud to polish shoes for men who barely acknowledge their existence. They run errands, deliver messages, steal when they think they can get away with it. Girls work too, though their labour is often less visible. They care for younger siblings, essentially becoming substitute mothers before they're 10. They help with piecework that mothers bring home, sewing garments, making artificial flowers, rolling cigars. Their small fingers are actually valued for detailed work. They fetch water, haul coal, clean, cook, all while still being children themselves who need care and nutrition and sleep. Street children are everywhere in 5 points. These are kids who've been orphaned, abandoned, or who've run away from abusive homes. They sleep in doorways, under stairs, in empty barrels or packing crates. They survive by begging, stealing, scavenging, and doing odd jobs. Charles Loring Brace, founder of the Children's Aid Society, estimates there are over 30,000 homeless children in New York City in the 1850s. 30,000. That's a small city's worth of children with no homes, no parents, no safety net. These street children form their own societies, their own hierarchies. Older kids protect younger ones, teaching them how to survive. They share food, information, and shelter. They develop their own slang, their own codes. They're remarkably resilient, but they're also deeply damaged. Many turn to crime because it's the only way to eat. Many die young from disease, violence, or exposure. The lucky ones get picked up by charitable organisations and sent west on orphan trains to work as farm labour, which is exploitation dressed up as salvation, but at least offers a chance at survival. Education is theoretically available. Public schools exist, but they're overcrowded, underfunded, and not mandatory. Many children never attend because their families need their labour more than they need literacy. Those who do go might attend sporadically, a few months a year when work is slow. They learn basic reading and arithmetic if they're lucky, but they're not building foundations for careers. They're just getting barely enough education to function in a society that doesn't want them anyway. Winter is especially brutal for children. Their small bodies lose heat faster than adults. They have less body mass to generate warmth. When they're underfed, which they always are, their bodies have no reserves to burn for heat. You can see it in their faces, pinched, pale, with dark circles under their eyes. They shiver constantly, their lips turning blue, their fingers and toes going numb. Frostbite is common. Children lose toes, fingers, even whole feet to the cold. Those who survive are permanently disabled, limping through life as living reminders that winter doesn't care about your age. Diseases target children with particular cruelty. Measles sweeps through tenements, and in its wake, children develop encephalitis, pneumonia, and blindness. Whooping cough causes babies to cough so violently they turn blue and stop breathing. Scarlet fever gives children high fevers and distinctive rashes, and kills about 20% of those infected. Diphtheria creates a membrane in the throat that slowly suffocates children over days. There are no vaccines, no antibiotics, no effective treatments. Parents just watch their children suffer and hope they're among the survivors. Accidents are another constant threat. Children fall out of windows downstairs into open wells. They're struck by carts and carriages in the crowded streets. They're burned by overturned stoves and lamps. They drown in the rivers when playing too close to the edge. Each accident is preventable by modern standards, safety railings, supervision, childproofing, but those concepts don't exist yet. Children are just expected to be careful, and when they're not, they die. The psychological impact of growing up in 5 Points is impossible to measure, but easy to imagine. Children witness violence regularly: domestic abuse, gang fights, police brutality. They see death constantly: siblings dying, neighbours collapsing in the street, bodies being carried out of buildings. They experience trauma that would require years of therapy to process, except therapy won't be invented for decades and wouldn't be available to them anyway. Many children develop what we'd now recognise as symptoms of PTSD: hypervigilance, emotional numbing, difficulty trusting others. They're anxious, depressed, aggressive. They've seen too much, suffered too much, and they're still children. Some cope by shutting down emotionally, becoming hard and cynical before they're 10. Others maintain an almost desperate optimism, clinging to hope because the alternative is unbearable. Play, when it happens, is resourceful and imaginative. Children don't have toys. Those cost money. They play with sticks, rocks, broken pieces of furniture, discarded items from the street. They create games out of nothing, inventing elaborate rules for activities that would look like nonsense to outsiders, but are deeply meaningful to them. They play in the most inhospitable environments: frozen courtyards, trash-filled alleys, crowded streets, because there's nowhere else to go. Some children show remarkable resilience and intelligence despite everything. They're sharp, observant, quick learners. Given opportunities, they could thrive, but opportunities are rare. The system is designed to keep them exactly where they are. Social mobility is nearly impossible. If you're born poor in 5 Points, you'll likely die poor in 5 Points. Your children will be poor in 5 Points. The cycle continues, generation after generation. Parents do their best with impossible circumstances. They love their children fiercely. They make impossible choices. Which child gets the warmest spot by the fire? Which child gets the biggest piece of bread? Which child gets to keep their shoes? These aren't choices anyone should have to make, but poverty forces them constantly. Parents go without food so their children can eat. They work themselves to exhaustion trying to provide, and still, it's often not enough. When children die, which they do with horrifying regularity, there's no time for extended mourning. You're sad, devastated even. But you have other children to feed, rent to pay, work to do. The dead child is wrapped in whatever cloth is available and buried quickly, often in a mass grave in Potter's Field. There's no headstone, no marker, no permanent record that this child existed. They're just gone, and life continues because it has to. Reformers will eventually take notice. Jacob Rees will photograph 5 Points children, showing the nation what poverty looks like in small faces. Organisations will start settlement houses, fresh air funds, orphanages. Child labour laws will eventually be passed, but that's all in the future. Right now, in 1854, children in 5 Points are on their own, surviving through a combination of luck, resilience, and the occasional kindness of strangers. The children of 5 Points don't ask for much. They don't dream of wealth or fame. They dream of simpler things, being warm, having enough to eat, shoes that fit, maybe a toy. They dream of survival. And for too many of them, even those modest dreams remain forever out of reach. They're just kids, trying to be kids, in a place that has no room for childhood. In 5 Points, disease doesn't knock, it lives with you. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, is rampant. It spreads through close quarters and poor ventilation. You cough blood into a rag, and your family tries not to think about what that means. Typhoid and cholera spike every time the weather warms and the ice melts, releasing all that frozen sewage into the water supply. Smallpox scars faces. Pneumonia kills the weak, the young, and the old. There are no antibiotics, no vaccines, no real understanding of germ theory. You just get sick, and either you recover or you don't. Tuberculosis is the white plague, the wasting disease, the slow death that takes its time. It spreads through the air when infected people cough, sneeze, or just breathe too close to you. In a tenement where 8 people share a 10 by 12 foot room with no ventilation, TB spreads like gossip. You start with a cough that won't quit. Then come the night sweats that soak through your clothing. You develop a fever that makes you feel like you're burning from the inside. You lose weight rapidly, your flesh melting away until you're gaunt and skeletal, which is why they call it consumption. It consumes you. The disease progresses over months or years. You cough up blood, bright red spatters on your handkerchief that you try to hide from your family, because you know what it means. Your lungs are being destroyed, eaten away by the bacteria. Eventually you can't work anymore. You can't climb the stairs. You lie in bed, struggling to breathe, drowning in your own fluids, and then you die, usually in the same room where your family sleeps, guaranteeing they'll be next. There's no cure. Doctors recommend fresh air, rest, and good nutrition, things that are completely unavailable in 5 Points. Some people are sent to sanitariums if they're wealthy enough, but you're not, so you stay home and infect everyone around you. Your children sleep next to you and breathe in the bacteria. Your spouse cares for you and contracts it. The disease moves through families like a slow-motion massacre, taking one person at a time over years. Cholera is the opposite. Fast, violent, and terrifying. It arrives in summer when the weather warms and contaminated water becomes a death sentence. You drink from the pump in the morning feeling fine. By afternoon, you're experiencing explosive diarrhea and vomiting. Your body expels fluids faster than you can replace them. You become dehydrated so quickly that your skin turns greyish-blue, your eyes sink into your skull, and your hands shrivel like you've been in water for hours. You might die within 12 hours of first symptoms. The diarrhea isn't ordinary, it's described as rice water stool. Pale, watery, flecked with mucus, and produced in volumes that seem impossible. You lose litres of fluid. Your body cramps from the electrolyte imbalance. You're conscious through most of it, aware that you're dying but unable to stop it. There's no treatment beyond trying to rehydrate, but in an era before IV fluids, that means forcing you to drink contaminated water, which just makes things worse. Cholera outbreaks are catastrophic. The disease spreads through shared water sources, so entire buildings can be infected simultaneously. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Families watch multiple members die in the same day. The panic is palpable. People flee the neighbourhood if they can, abandoning the sick, which doesn't help because they carry the disease with them. The 1832, 1849 and 1854 cholera epidemics killed thousands in New York, with 5 Points being devastated each time. Typhoid is another waterborne killer, though it works more slowly than cholera. It causes sustained high fevers, headaches, weakness, and abdominal pain. You develop a characteristic rash of rose-coloured spots on your chest. Your fever can reach 104 or 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and in that delirium, you might not recognise your own family. The disease attacks your intestines, and in some cases, your intestinal wall perforates, spilling bacteria into your abdomen and killing you from septic shock. Typhoid takes weeks to kill you, during which you're completely incapacitated. Someone has to care for you, feeding you, cleaning you, changing your sweat-soaked bedding. This caregiver is almost certainly going to catch typhoid themselves because the bacteria is shed in your feces and they're handling your waste without proper sanitation. It's a disease that takes down caregivers, punishing compassion with infection. Smallpox is the face-scarring disease that everyone fears. It starts with flu-like symptoms, then progresses to a distinctive rash that turns into pus-filled blisters covering your entire body, face, arms, legs, even inside your mouth and throat. The pain is excruciating. The blisters burst, scab over, and leave permanent pitted scars. Many victims are blinded when the blisters form on their eyes. Many die, especially children, with mortality rates around 30%. Vaccination exists. Edward Jenner developed the smallpox vaccine in 1796, but it's not widely available or accepted in 5 points. Vaccines cost money. Many people distrust them based on religious grounds or simple suspicion of medicine. Some believe vaccination goes against God's will. So smallpox continues to sweep through the slums regularly, disfiguring survivors and killing thousands. You can always tell who survived smallpox by their pocked faces, visible reminders of an enemy that won't go away. Pneumonia is the winter killer. When your lungs fill with fluid from bacterial or viral infection, you drown from the inside. It's especially common in 5 points because of the cold, damp conditions, the smoke-filled air, and the underlying malnutrition that weakens everyone's immune system. Pneumonia can kill in days. You develop a fever, difficulty breathing, a cough that produces rust-coloured phlegm. Your chest hurts with every breath. Eventually you can't get enough oxygen, you become confused and delirious, and you die. Children and the elderly are most vulnerable, but pneumonia kills healthy adults too, especially those weakened by other conditions or simple exhaustion. There's no penicillin, no oxygen therapy, no mechanical ventilation. Treatment consists of keeping you warm and hoping. Most people don't survive. Pneumonia is listed as the cause of death on countless burial records, a catch-all for respiratory failure that ends lives by the thousands. Diphtheria is the child killer that parents dread. It creates a thick grey membrane in the throat that blocks breathing. Children with diphtheria make a characteristic sound, a barking cough, and high-pitched breathing called stridor. The membrane grows thicker, and eventually the child suffocates slowly, over hours or days, while parents watch helplessly. Some doctors try to remove the membrane surgically, or perform emergency tracheotomies, cutting into the windpipe to create new airway. But these procedures are dangerous and often fatal themselves. Scarlet fever comes on suddenly, high fever, sore throat, and a sandpaper-like red rash that spreads across the body. It's caused by Streptococcus bacteria and spreads through close contact, which means it tears through crowded tenements like fire. Many children recover, but some develop complications: rheumatic fever that damages their hearts, kidney failure, or ear infections that leave them deaf. About 20% of infected children die, their small bodies unable to fight off the bacterial invasion. Measles seems almost minor compared to cholera or smallpox, but it's still deadly, especially to malnourished children. The disease causes high fevers, cough, and a distinctive rash. But the real danger comes from complications: pneumonia, encephalitis, brain inflammation, or blindness. Measles suppresses the immune system for weeks after infection, leaving children vulnerable to other diseases. In 5 points, measles often kills not directly, but by weakening children enough that something else finishes them off. Whooping cough, pertussis, is named for its distinctive sound. Infected children cough so violently that they gasp for breath afterward, making a whoop sound. During coughing fits, babies can turn blue from lack of oxygen. They vomit from the force of coughing. They break ribs. Infants are especially vulnerable and often die from secondary pneumonia or simply from exhaustion. Their tiny bodies can't sustain the effort of coughing for weeks. There's no treatment. You just hope they're strong enough to survive. The problem with disease in 5 points isn't just the presence of bacteria and viruses, it's the perfect storm of conditions that allow them to thrive. Overcrowding means diseases spread person to person instantly. Poor nutrition means immune systems are compromised. Contaminated water spreads waterborne diseases. Poor ventilation traps airborne pathogens. Lack of sanitation creates breeding grounds for bacteria. No access to medical care means diseases go untreated. It's a system designed to kill people, and it works efficiently. Doctors exist but are expensive and often ineffective. Medical science in the 1850s is still primitive. Bloodletting is a common treatment, deliberately draining blood to balance the humours, which obviously doesn't work and often makes things worse. Doctors prescribe mercury for various ailments, which is literally poison, and causes its own set of problems including kidney failure and neurological damage. Opium and alcohol are given for pain, which at least makes dying more comfortable, but doesn't cure anything. Most people in 5 Points never see a doctor. They rely on home remedies, folk medicine, and prayer. Mustard plasters for congestion, which burn the skin. Poultices made from bread or potatoes applied to wounds. Herbal teas that may or may not do anything. Some remedies are harmless placebos. Some actually help through mechanisms people don't understand. Some are actively harmful, but persist because people don't know better. There's also a thriving business in patent medicines. Bottled cure-alls sold by travelling salesmen and in shops. These medicines claim to cure everything from consumption to cancer. In reality, they're mostly alcohol, opium, or just coloured water. They're expensive and useless, but desperate people buy them anyway because hope is a powerful motivator when your child is dying and there's nothing else to try. Death is everywhere and constant. You walk past it on the streets. People collapsed from cholera, children's bodies being carried out of buildings, funeral processions for the 10th time this month. You smell it in the air, decomposition, disease, the sweet sick smell of infection. You hear it in the coughs echoing through the tenement walls, the death rattles, the grieving mother's cries. Death is so common that people become numb to it, developing a dark gallows humour just to cope. The wealthy uptown have some protection. They live in cleaner neighbourhoods with better water and sanitation. They can afford doctors, good nutrition, and rest when they're sick. They're starting to get vaccinations for smallpox. They're not immune to disease, consumption and typhoid strike across class lines, but their survival rates are significantly better. Money doesn't buy immortality, but it does buy better odds. In 5 Points, disease is the great equalizer and the constant companion. It doesn't care if you're Irish, German, black or native born. It doesn't care if you're young or old, good or bad, deserving or undeserving. It just spreads through the population like a harvester cutting wheat, taking whoever it can reach. And in these crowded, filthy, frozen slums, it can reach everyone. You live with the knowledge that illness could strike at any moment. A cough that won't stop. A fever that won't break. Diarrhea that won't end. Any of these could be nothing. Or they could be the beginning of the end. So you hope, you pray, and you try not to get too attached to your neighbours, because there's a good chance they won't be there next month. Disease doesn't need a key to your tenement. It's already inside. If you're an adult in 5 Points, you work. Hard. Men labour in factories, on the docks, in construction, doing back-breaking physical work for pennies a day. Women take in piecework, sewing garments, making artificial flowers, rolling cigars, all by candlelight in freezing rooms, getting paid barely enough to buy bread. Children work too because every penny counts. There are no weekends, no sick days, no worker protections. If you get injured on the job, you're fired. If you complain, you're replaced. The system isn't designed to help you. It's designed to use you up. Let's start with the men. If you're male and able-bodied, your best option is probably dock work along the waterfront. You wake up before dawn and walk to the piers where hundreds of other men are already waiting. The foremen walk along the crowd, pointing at workers like they're selecting livestock. You. If you're chosen, congratulations. You've got work for the day. If not, you've wasted hours standing in the cold for nothing, and you get to try again tomorrow with rent still due and children still hungry. Dock work is brutal. You're loading and unloading ships, carrying cargo that weighs anywhere from 50 to 200 pounds, sacks of grain, barrels of rum, crates of machinery, bales of cotton. You haul these up and down gangplanks that are slippery with ice in winter or algae in summer. There are no safety harnesses, no hard hats, no regulations about weight limits. You lift until your back screams, until your hands bleed, until you physically can't continue. The pay is about $1 for a full day's work, maybe $1.50 if you're skilled. Out of that you pay for food, rent and whatever else your family needs. It's never enough. The dangers are constant and varied. You can fall into the water, common when ships are rocking and gangplanks are slippery, and if you can't swim, which most people can't, you drown. Heavy cargo swinging from cranes can crush you against the dock or the ship's hull. Ropes snap under tension, whipping back with enough force to decapitate someone. Cargo falls and pins workers beneath it. Injuries are daily occurrences. Deaths happen weekly. There's no workers' compensation. If you're injured, you're just out of work until you heal. If you die, your family gets nothing. Factory work is the other major employer of men. Textile mills, tanneries, slaughterhouses, breweries, metalworks. New York is industrializing rapidly, and someone needs to operate the machinery. You work 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in conditions that would violate every modern safety regulation ever written. The factories are poorly lit, badly ventilated, and filled with dangerous machinery that has no safety guards. You feed material into machines that could easily take your fingers, hands, or arms if you're not careful, and sometimes even if you are. The noise is deafening. Machinery clatters and bangs constantly. You can't hear warnings shouted by co-workers. You develop hearing loss within months. The air is filled with particulates, cotton dust in textile mills, chemical fumes in tanneries, smoke and ash everywhere. You breathe this all day, every day, developing chronic respiratory problems that will kill you by age 40 if something else doesn't get you first. Tanneries are particularly horrible. They process animal hides into leather using chemicals like lime, alum and urine. Yes, human urine, collected and sold for this purpose. The smell is indescribable. Workers stand in vats of these chemicals, their skin constantly irritated and burned. The chemicals cause sores that never quite heal. Many tannery workers develop cancer from the exposure, though they won't understand the connection for decades. Construction work is booming as New York expands, but it's incredibly dangerous. You're working on scaffolding made of rough wood lashed together with rope. There are no safety regulations, no inspection requirements. Scaffolding collapses regularly, sending workers plummeting to their deaths. You work with heavy tools, hammers, pickaxes, saws, doing physical labour in all weather conditions. In winter, you're working in freezing temperatures with numb fingers trying to grip tools. In summer, you're working in oppressive heat, risking heat stroke. Women's work is different, but no less exploitative. Most women can't do heavy labour, and even if they could, they wouldn't be hired because factory foremen believe women are too delicate. So women take in piecework, bringing unfinished garments, flowers, or cigars home to complete in their tenement rooms. This is called sweating, or the sweating system, and it's a perfect way to exploit desperate people. You might be sewing shirts for a clothing manufacturer. They deliver bundles of cut fabric, and you're paid per completed shirt, maybe 3 to 5 cents per piece. A fast seamstress working from dawn until midnight by candlelight might complete 10 shirts. That's 30 to 50 cents for 16 hours of work. Your fingers cramp from holding the needle. Your eyes strain in the poor light. You prick your fingers constantly, bleeding onto the fabric and having to redo work. Your back aches from hunching over your work. And at the end of the day, you've earned less than what your husband makes in a few hours of dock work. Making artificial flowers is another common piecework job. You're creating decorative flowers from paper, fabric and wire that will adorn wealthy women's hats and dresses. You're paid per completed dozen, maybe 5 cents per 12 flowers. Each flower requires cutting, shaping, gluing and assembly. Your fingers become stained with dye. You inhale toxic fumes from the glues and chemicals. You work in terrible light, straining to see the delicate work. Children help because their small fingers are useful for this detailed work. The entire family participates, and together you might make 50 cents a day. Rolling cigars pays slightly better, but comes with its own hazards. Tobacco dust fills the air, causing respiratory problems. The tobacco stains your fingers brown. You develop a chronic cough. The work is repetitive, selecting leaves, rolling them precisely, trimming the ends, done hundreds of times a day. Your hands develop repetitive stress injuries, your fingers becoming stiff and painful. You work piece rate, maybe earning $1 for rolling several hundred cigars, which takes all day and into the night. The worst part of piecework is that you're competing against everyone else doing the same work. Manufacturers can always pay less because desperate women will accept any wage rather than starve. If you complain about the rates, they'll find someone more desperate. The pay drops steadily as more immigrants arrive and competition increases. What paid 5 cents per piece last year now pays 3 cents. You have to work twice as hard to make the same amount. It's a race to the bottom, and everyone's losing. Laundry work is another option for women. You take in washing from wealthy families or businesses, scrubbing clothes by hand in your tenement room. Your hands are constantly wet, red, and cracked from the harsh lye soap and hot water. In winter, this is torture. Your hands freeze between washings, developing chilblains and permanent damage. You're paid per piece, maybe 2 cents per shirt, 5 cents for a sheet. You might wash 50 items to make $1, and that's a full day of back-breaking labour bent over a tub. Street vendors are everywhere in 5 Points. Men and women selling everything imaginable. Hot corn, oysters, apples, newspapers, matches, shoelaces, used clothing. You buy inventory in the morning and hope to sell it before evening. If you sell everything, you might make 50 cents profit. If you don't, you've lost your investment and have nothing. It's a gamble every single day. Street vending requires a thick skin. You're harassed by police, chased off corners by rival vendors, and ignored by most potential customers. You stand in all weather, calling out your wares until your voice goes hoarse, hoping someone will buy. Children work alongside adults because family survival requires every available person contributing. Boys shine shoes, standing on street corners with their kits, offering to clean shoes for a penny. They sell newspapers, buying papers for a penny and selling them for 2 cents, keeping the difference. Girls help their mothers with piecework, caring for younger siblings, or doing domestic work for slightly wealthier families, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, running errands for maybe 25 cents a week. The workday has no fixed end. You work until the job is done, until you physically can't continue, or until you've earned enough to justify stopping. There's no such thing as overtime pay, no concept of work-life balance. Work is life. The rest is just the brief periods when you're not working, eating, sleeping, existing. Sundays are theoretically rest days, protected by religious tradition and some local ordinances. But many people work Sundays anyway because they can't afford not to. If you're behind on rent, if your children are hungry, if you owe money to the grocer, you work 7 days a week. Rest is a luxury for people with savings, and you don't have savings. You have debt and desperation. There are no unions to protect you, no labour laws to enforce reasonable conditions. Attempts to organise are crushed quickly. Employers fire troublemakers and blacklist them so they can't find work elsewhere. The police side with employers over workers. If workers strike, they're arrested for disturbing the peace or worse. The system is rigged from top to bottom in favour of the owners and against the labourers. Injuries are common and career-ending. You lose fingers in machinery, develop hernias from heavy lifting, break bones that heal poorly or not at all. You develop chronic pain that makes work increasingly difficult. There's no disability insurance, no workers' compensation. If you can't work, you don't eat. It's that simple. Many injured workers end up begging on the streets, their productive lives over at age 35 because a rope snapped or a machine malfunctioned. The wealthy factory owners and businessmen who profit from your labour live uptown in comfortable homes. They've never set foot in 5 Points. They don't know your name, your family situation, or your struggles. You're just labour, interchangeable, replaceable, disposable. When you wear out, when your body breaks down from the relentless exploitation, they'll hire someone else just off the boat from Ireland or Germany, equally desperate and willing to work for even less. Some people turn to crime because it pays better than honours work with lower physical costs. Pickpocketing, burglary, running con games, these activities can earn more in an hour than a week of factory work. It's risky. Getting caught means prison or worse. But when you're watching your children starve on honest wages, crime starts looking less immoral and more practical. 5 Points has a reputation for criminality, not because the people are inherently bad, but because the legitimate economy has failed them so completely that illegal alternatives become rational choices. Every night you collapse into bed, if you have a bed, exhausted to your bones. Your muscles ache, your hands throb, your back protests every movement. You're not just tired, you're depleted, worn down to nothing. And tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again because the alternative is homelessness and starvation. There is no retirement, no pension, no golden years. You work until your body gives out, and then you die, probably in the same tenement where you spent your entire working life. The only thing that keeps you going is the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, your children will have it better. That somehow they'll escape 5 points, find better work, live better lives. It's not a realistic hope. Social mobility is nearly impossible, but it's all you have. So you work, you grind, you endure. Because that's what survival looks like in 5 points. Walking through 5 points in winter is an adventure, and not the fun kind. The streets are unpaved, muddy when it's warm, frozen into jagged ruts when it's cold. Snow piles up and turns into grey, compacted sludge mixed with horse manure, garbage, and human waste tossed from windows. There's no street cleaning, no sanitation department. You navigate by memory and luck, avoiding the worst pits and praying you don't slip on ice and break something. Because if you do, there's no workers' comp, no safety net. You just suffer. The streets of 5 points aren't really streets in the modern sense. They're more like suggestions of where a street might go, carved through the neighbourhood by foot traffic and carts over decades. None of them are paved. The wealthy neighbourhoods uptown are getting cobblestones and even some experimental asphalt, but 5 points? You get dirt, just dirt. Dirt that becomes mud when it rains or snows, and mud that freezes into a treacherous landscape of peaks, valleys, and ankle-breaking holes when the temperature drops. The street surface is a geological record of everything that's happened there. Horse manure accumulates in layers, fresh deposits on top, older material compressed beneath, creating a stratified system that archaeologists of the future would find fascinating, and everyone living here finds revolting. The horses that pull carts, wagons and carriages through 5 points leave behind approximately 20 pounds of manure per horse per day. Multiply that by hundreds of horses, and you've got literal tons of shit covering the streets at any given time. In winter, this manure freezes into the surface, creating a textured terrain that's slippery and unstable. You're walking on frozen horse shit mixed with ice. And your footing is never certain. One moment you're stable, the next your foot slides out from under you, and you're on your back wondering if you've broken your tailbone. Getting up is difficult because everything is slippery, and your hands are now covered in whatever mixture of frozen substances you used to push yourself upright. Congratulations, you've just hand-planted in historical feces. Garbage disposal in 5 points follows a simple system. Throw it in the street. There's no garbage collection, no designated disposal sites, no one coming to take away your refuse, so everyone just tosses their trash out the window or door. Food scraps, broken pottery, rags, ashes from stoves, dead rats, occasionally dead cats, and anything else you want to get rid of. This garbage piles up in drifts along the buildings, creating obstacles that grow taller throughout the winter until they're waist-high in some places. The pigs are supposed to help with this. New York City, in its infinite wisdom, allows pigs to roam the streets freely because they eat the garbage. It's the 1850s version of a waste management system, and it works about as well as you'd expect. The pigs do eat organic waste, which helps, but they also root through the garbage piles, spreading it around, and they leave their own waste behind. Plus, they're aggressive. Getting charged by a territorial pig while trying to walk to work is a regular 5 points experience. The pigs know they own the streets. You're just visiting. Dead animals are another street feature. Horses that collapse from overwork or disease are sometimes left where they fall, if moving them is too much trouble. Dogs die in the streets from starvation or disease. Rats, of course, are everywhere, and dead ones accumulate in corners and gutters. In winter, these carcasses freeze and become part of the landscape. Children play around them. Adults step over them. Everyone just accepts that decomposing animals are street furniture now. The ruts in the street are formed by cartwheels cutting the same paths over and over. When these ruts freeze, they create channels that are 6 to 8 inches deep with sharp, icy edges. Walking across the street means navigating these frozen trenches, and if you step wrong, you can turn an ankle easily. Carts and wagons get stuck in the ruts regularly, blocking traffic. Not that 5 points has much in the way of traffic flow to begin with. When a cart gets stuck, the driver curses, beats the horse, and eventually gets other people to help push it free, all while everyone else trying to pass is forced to detour around. Puddles form in every depression, and in winter, they freeze into ice patches that are invisible under a dusting of snow. These are ankle breakers and hip fractures waiting to happen. You develop a walking style that's part shuffle, part careful placement, testing each step before committing your full weight. Walking anywhere takes twice as long as it should because you're moving like you're crossing a minefield, which metaphorically you are. The narrow streets make everything worse. 5-point streets are barely wide enough for a single cart, let alone two-way traffic. When two carts meet heading opposite directions, there's a standoff while they figure out who backs up. Usually this is decided by whoever is bigger, angrier, or more drunk. While this negotiation happens, pedestrians are trapped, pressed against buildings, trying not to get splashed by wheels churning through the frozen muck. Slippery is an understatement for winter conditions. The combination of ice, frozen manure, compacted snow, and mystery slime creates a surface with approximately zero friction. People fall constantly. The elderly are at particular risk. A fall at 60 might mean a broken hip, which is essentially a death sentence in a time before hip replacements or proper medical care. You just don't heal from that. You become bedridden and die within months from pneumonia or infection. Children slip and crack their heads on the frozen ground, developing concussions or worse. Workers carrying heavy loads fall and drop their cargo, sometimes onto themselves or others. Pregnant women slip, risking miscarriage. Every fall is dangerous, and every trip outside is a calculated risk. Some days the streets are so treacherous that people simply don't leave their buildings unless absolutely necessary, which means missing work, which means no pay, which means the streets are literally costing you money. The darkness makes everything more dangerous. There are no streetlights in 5 points. The wealthy neighbourhoods are starting to get gas lamps, but here you get nothing. When the sun goes down, the streets become pitch black. You navigate by memory, by feel, and by the faint light that leaks from windows and doorways. People carry lanterns if they can afford them, but lanterns cost money for oil or candles, and that light attracts the attention of thieves who know someone carrying a lantern probably has something worth stealing. Navigating in the dark means tripping over obstacles you can't see. Garbage piles, dead animals, drunks passed out in doorways, chamber pot contents recently dumped, open cellar doors that create sudden drops into basements. You walk with one hand outstretched, feeling your way along buildings, moving slowly, hoping you don't step into something awful. The sound of the streets at night is distinct. Shuffling feet, occasional curses as someone trips, dogs barking, and the ever-present sound of someone coughing from multiple directions. Violence is another street hazard. 5 Points is notorious for its gang activity, and territorial disputes often play out in the streets. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Plug Uglies. These gangs clash in massive brawls involving hundreds of people armed with clubs, bricks, knives, and improvised weapons. These street battles can erupt without warning. You might be walking home from work and suddenly find yourself in the middle of a riot. Getting caught in the crossfire of a gang fight means getting hit by flying bricks, trampled by crowds, or mistaken for an enemy and beaten. Even when there's no organised violence, there's casual danger. Muggers work the dark streets, targeting anyone who looks like they might have money, which in 5 Points means anyone who looks slightly less desperate than average. Pickpockets work crowds. Con artists run schemes. Drunk men stumble out of saloons looking for fights. Women walking alone, especially at night, are at risk of assault. The streets aren't policed effectively. Police rarely venture into 5 Points unless in large groups, and when they do come, they're more interested in cracking skulls than helping anyone. The buildings themselves create hazards. Tenements are poorly constructed and maintained, and things fall off them regularly. Bricks loosened by freeze-thaw cycles drop from walls. Shutters torn off by wind become projectiles. Icicles the size of spears hang from roofs and gutters, occasionally breaking free and impaling whatever's below. Usually nothing important, occasionally someone's shoulder or head. You learn to walk in the middle of the street when possible, away from the buildings, though this puts you in the path of carts and carriages. Carts and wagons are dangerous even beyond the ruts they create. Drivers don't care about pedestrians. They don't slow down. They don't stop. If you're in the way, you either move or get run over. People are struck and killed by carts regularly. Bodies crushed beneath wheels, legs shattered by collisions. There's no liability, no consequences for the driver. It's considered the pedestrian's fault for not getting out of the way fast enough. If you're hit by a cart, you're not getting sympathy. You're getting blamed. Fire is another street danger. Buildings catch fire regularly, and when they do, flames can spread to adjacent structures within minutes. If you're on a street between burning buildings, you can be trapped, cooked alive by radiant heat or suffocated by smoke. Fire brigades are volunteer operations run by rival gangs, and they often fight each other rather than the fire, competing for the insurance payout that comes with putting out a blaze. While they're brawling, buildings burn and people die. The street corners are dominated by saloons, and their clientele spills out onto the sidewalks. Drunk men who've just lost their wages to alcohol, aggressive panhandlers, prostitutes working, drug dealers selling opium. These corners are loud, chaotic, and dangerous. You cross the street to avoid them if possible, but sometimes there's no way around. You just put your head down, move quickly, and hope nobody decides you look like an easy target. Children are everywhere in the streets, playing in conditions that would horrify modern parents. They build forts from garbage piles. They slide on the ice, often barefoot. They throw frozen horse manure at each other like snowballs. They play in traffic, darting between carts. Many are injured or killed, but children are somehow simultaneously more resilient and more expendable in 5 Points. Life continues even when children die, because what else can it do? The smell of the streets deserves its own paragraph. In winter, the cold somewhat mutes the odours, but they're still present. Rotting garbage, horse manure, human waste, dead animals, industrial chemicals from nearby factories, smoke from thousands of stoves, and the general funk of unwashed humanity. When the wind is still, the smell settles like a blanket over everything. When the wind picks up, it just moves the smell around, ensuring everyone gets a turn experiencing the full bouquet. The wealthy don't walk these streets. They travel in enclosed carriages that protect them from the muck and the smell and the danger. They see 5 Points from behind glass, a passing blur of poverty they don't have to engage with. Their streets uptown are cleaner, safer, better lit. The contrast isn't subtle. It's a different world separated by a few miles and a vast economic gulf. But for you, these streets are unavoidable. You walk them every day to get to work, to fetch water, to buy food. You've developed skills that outsiders don't have. The ability to read the street surface, to know which shortcuts are safe, to sense when danger is present. You've learned which puddles are shallow and which are deep enough to soak your only pair of shoes. You know which corners to avoid and which buildings lean so badly they might collapse. These streets are hostile, dangerous and filthy, but they're yours, and somehow you navigate them every day, making it to your destination and back. It's not heroic. It's just what survival looks like when the place you live is actively trying to kill you. One frozen step at a time. 5 Points has a reputation, and it's not for friendly neighbours and potluck dinners. It's known as one of the most dangerous neighbourhoods in America. Gangs like the Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, and the Plug Uglies fight for territory, respect, and control over illegal enterprises. Pickpockets work the crowded streets. Burglars slip into tenements at night. Desperate people do desperate things. You keep your head down, guard your belongings, and try not to make eye contact. The police rarely come here, and when they do, they're more interested in cracking skulls than solving crimes. The gangs are the most visible face of 5 Points crime, but they're also the most misunderstood. These aren't sophisticated criminal organisations like you'd see in movies. They're more like tribal affiliations mixed with street fighting clubs and political machines. The Dead Rabbits are predominantly Irish Catholic, based in the heart of 5 Points. The Bowery Boys are largely native-born Americans and Irish Protestants from the slightly more respectable Bowery area. The rivalry between them is about ethnicity, religion, politics, and turf, and it plays out in street battles that can involve hundreds of combatants. These gang fights aren't secretive midnight ambushes. They're open warfare, scheduled like sporting events. Word goes out that the Dead Rabbits and Bowery Boys will clash on a particular day at a particular location, and crowds gather to watch. The gangs arrive armed with clubs studded with nails, brass knuckles, bricks, knives, and whatever weapons they can improvise. They charge at each other in waves, brawling in the streets for hours while spectators cheer. Police eventually show up, but usually not until the fighting has been going on for hours, and their intervention is half-hearted at best. The Plug Uglies got their name from the plug hats they wore. Tall hats stuffed with wool and leather to protect their heads during fights. They're known for being particularly brutal, filling their hats with rocks to use as weapons. The Atlantic Guards, the Shirt Tails, the Roach Guards, There are dozens of gangs, each with their own territory, their own colours, their own rituals. Membership provides identity, protection and purpose in a neighbourhood where those things are scarce. But the gangs aren't just about fighting. They run protection rackets, control illegal gambling operations, fix elections and manage prostitution rings. They're intertwined with local politics through Tammany Hall, the democratic political machine that runs New York. Gangs provide muscle for political rallies, intimidate voters, and stuff ballot boxes. In exchange, politicians ensure police look the other way, and that gang leaders get patronage jobs. It's a corrupt system where crime and government are inseparable. Pickpocketing is an art form in 5 Points, and children are the master practitioners. Small fingers, innocent faces, and the ability to disappear into crowds make children ideal thieves. They work in teams. One creates a distraction while another lifts the wallet or watch. They target anyone who looks like they have money, which in 5 Points means anyone wearing clothes without visible holes. The skilled pickpockets can remove a wallet from an inside coat pocket without the victim feeling anything. By the time you realise you've been robbed, the thief is 3 blocks away and your money is already being divided among the gang. The Fagin system, made famous by Dickens but very real in New York, operates openly. Adult criminals recruit children, teach them to steal, and take most of the profits. These children live with their master, who provides food and shelter in exchange for their criminal earnings. It's exploitation wrapped in a mentor relationship, and it's everywhere. Children as young as 5 or 6 are trained to steal, sent out daily to bring back wallets, handkerchiefs, jewellery, anything valuable and portable. Burglary is common, though there's not much worth stealing in 5 Points. Most tenement residents own nothing of value, but burglars target shops, warehouses, and occasionally venture uptown to wealthier neighbourhoods where the pickings are better. Breaking into buildings is easy when construction is shoddy and locks are simple. Burglars work at night, entering through windows or forcing doors, taking whatever they can carry. The stolen goods end up in fencing operations, shops that buy stolen property and resell it, no questions asked. Confidence schemes run constantly. Con artists work elaborate frauds, convincing newcomers to the city to invest in fake businesses, buy counterfeit goods, or hand over money for promised services that never materialise. The 3-card Monte game appears on street corners, a simple shell game where the dealer manipulates cards and accomplices in the crowd pretend to win, encouraging marks to bet. Of course, the mark always loses. The game is rigged, but desperation makes people believe they can beat the odds. Prostitution is everywhere in 5 Points, often operating out of concert saloons and dance halls that are fronts for brothels. Women and girls, some as young as 12 or 13, sell their bodies because they have no other way to survive. Some are forced into prostitution by circumstances, others by men who traffic them. The prostitutes are exploited by pimps, robbed by customers, arrested by police, and infected by diseases they can't treat. It's a brutal existence that usually ends in early death from disease, violence, or suicide. Robbery. The violent taking of property happens less frequently than pickpocketing but is more terrifying. Muggers work dark alleys and quiet streets, targeting lone victims. They use violence immediately, a club to the head, a knife to the ribs, taking what they want and disappearing. Some victims survive with injuries and empty pockets, some don't survive at all. Their bodies are found in alleys in the morning, stripped of anything valuable, left for the city to dispose of. Murder rates in 5 Points are difficult to calculate because many deaths are never reported or investigated, but they're certainly higher than in other parts of the city. People are killed in gang fights, in domestic disputes fueled by alcohol and desperation, in robberies gone wrong, or simply in arguments that escalate too quickly. There's a casual acceptance of violence that would shock modern sensibilities. A man gets stabbed in a saloon fight, and patrons just step over the body and continue drinking. Life is cheap when everyone is struggling to survive. The police presence in 5 Points is minimal and ineffective. The New York Municipal Police, formed in 1845, are supposed to patrol the entire city, but officers avoid 5 Points whenever possible. It's dangerous for them. They're outnumbered, outgunned by gangs, and not particularly welcome. When police do enter the neighbourhood, they travel in groups and come with clubs swinging. They're not there to protect residents or solve crimes. They're there to assert authority through violence. Police corruption is rampant. Officers accept bribes to ignore crimes, protect certain gang operations, and warn criminals about raids. Some officers are essentially on gang payrolls, providing information and protection in exchange for money. The relationship between police and criminals is transactional, not adversarial. Both sides understand that certain rules govern their interactions, and as long as everyone follows the rules, everyone profits, except the residents of 5 Points, who are victimised by both criminals and corrupt police. The judicial system is equally compromised. Judges are political appointees connected to Tammany Hall, which means they're connected to the gangs. Court cases are often predetermined. Guilty verdicts can be bought. Innocent people are convicted on false testimony. Criminals with political connections walk free. Justice is not blind in 5 Points. It's for sale to the highest bidder or the person with the right connections. Prison is brutal. The Tombs, New York's main jail, is a notorious hellhole where prisoners are packed into cells, fed barely enough to survive, and subjected to violence from guards and other inmates. Being sent to the Tombs is a death sentence for many. They die from disease, malnutrition, or violence before their trial even happens. For those convicted and sent to longer-term prisons like Sing Sing, the conditions are worse. Hard labour, corporal punishment, and casual cruelty are standard. Many prisoners emerge broken in body and spirit if they emerge at all. Execution is public and frequent. Hangings draw crowds of thousands who treat them as entertainment. The condemned are marched to the gallows, or given a chance to speak. Some confess, some proclaim innocence, some just curse the crowd, and then dropped through the trap door. The crowd cheers or jeers, depending on the crime and the criminal. Bodies are sometimes left hanging as warnings. It's meant to deter crime. But in 5 Points, the threat of hanging is just another background risk in a life already full of mortal dangers. Children grow up witnessing this violence. They see people beaten in the streets. They watch gang fights. They know which neighbours are thieves, which are fences, which sell stolen goods. Crime isn't something that happens in the shadows. It's open, visible, normalised. Children learn early that the official rules of society don't apply in 5 Points. There are other rules, unwritten but understood. Don't snitch. Protect your own. Trust no one outside your immediate circle, and survive by any means necessary. The moral calculations change when you're starving. Is it wrong to steal a loaf of bread when your children haven't eaten in 2 days? Is it wrong to pick a wealthy man's pocket when he has more money in that pocket than you'll earn in a month? Is it wrong to fence stolen goods when it's the only way to pay rent? The middle-class morality that says theft is wrong assumes people have legitimate ways to survive. In 5 Points, those legitimate ways often don't exist, so people create illegitimate ones. Some people maintain rigid ethical standards, even in desperate circumstances. They refuse to steal, refuse to participate in criminal enterprises, struggle through poverty while maintaining their principles. These people suffer more but sleep better. If sleeping on a straw mattress in a freezing room can be called sleeping well, others make compromises. I won't steal from neighbours, but tourists are fair game. I won't commit violence, but I'll buy stolen goods. Everyone draws their line somewhere, and everyone crosses someone else's line. The wealthy uptown moralise about 5 Points crime, calling residents criminal classes and dangerous elements that threaten civilized society. They publish outraged editorials about gang violence and street crime, but they don't acknowledge their role in creating the conditions that breed crime. They don't mention that the factories and docks that enrich them pay wages too low to live on. They don't discuss how their political machines exploit the poor for votes and labour. It's easier to blame the poor for being criminal than to examine why poverty and crime are inseparable. Reformers occasionally venture into 5 Points, documenting the crime and squalor, writing breathless accounts of the depravity they witness. Some genuinely want to help, establishing missions and aid societies. Others are just tourists, slumming in poverty for the thrill of seeing how the other half lives, then returning to their comfortable homes to write sanctimonious articles. The residents of 5 Points can tell the difference. They accept help from the genuine reformers and ignore or mock the tourists. There are honest people in 5 Points, people working hard, raising families, trying to live decent lives despite impossible circumstances. They're the majority, actually. Most residents aren't criminals, they're just poor. But the criminals are more visible, more dramatic. more likely to make the newspapers. So 5 Points gets defined by its worst elements, its reputation as America's most dangerous slum, even though most people living there are just trying to survive another day without becoming victims or perpetrators. Crime in 5 Points isn't an aberration. It's a rational response to a system designed to exploit and discard people. When legitimate work doesn't pay enough to survive, when the law doesn't protect you, when police are as dangerous as criminals, when society has written you off as disposable, crime becomes not just understandable but logical. It's survival by other means. And survival, in 5 Points, is the only game that matters. In a neighbourhood this cold, this miserable and this hopeless, drinking isn't a vice, it's a survival strategy. Whiskey is cheap, beer is cheaper, and both provide a brief escape from the grinding reality of your life. Saloons are everywhere, warm and dimly lit, offering not just alcohol but also a sense of community. Men drink to forget. Women drink to cope. Children are sometimes sent to fetch liquor for their parents. Alcoholism is rampant. It destroys families, but it also numbs the pain of living in a frozen slum where tomorrow might be worse than today. There's a saloon on nearly every corner in 5 Points, sometimes 2 or 3 on the same block. These aren't the gentlemen's clubs of uptown with polished wood and brass fixtures. These are rough establishments with sawdust floors, broken furniture, and a permanent haze of tobacco smoke. But they're warm. They have stoves that actually work, fueled by the establishment because warmth brings in customers. In winter, this might be the only genuinely warm place you'll experience all day, and that alone is worth the price of admission. A glass of whiskey cost about 3 cents, maybe 5 cents for the better stuff, though better is relative when you're talking about rock gut liquor that might contain anything from wood alcohol to turpentine to achieve the right colour and burn. Beer is even cheaper, a penny or 2 for a glass, and it's safer than water because the brewing process involves boiling, which kills most bacteria. This makes beer the most rational beverage choice for anyone who wants to avoid cholera, which is everyone. So children drink weak beer, adults drink stronger beer, and serious drinkers move on to spirits. The saloons serve multiple functions beyond just dispensing alcohol. They're social clubs where men gather after work, warming themselves by the stove, sharing news and gossip. They're informal hiring halls where foremen come looking for dock workers or day labourers. They're political organising spaces where ward bosses hold court, dispensing favours and collecting loyalty. They're banks where working men cash their pay. They're dining rooms serving free lunch, usually salty foods like pickled eggs, pretzels and dried fish designed to make you thirsty and buy more drinks. But still, it's food. For men, the saloon is often more home than home. Your tenement room is freezing, crowded with screaming children, and smells like desperation. The saloon is warm, relatively quiet, and offers male camaraderie. You can nurse a beer for an hour while your hands thaw and your mood improves. You can forget, at least briefly, that you're one injury away from complete destitution. The saloon doesn't judge you. It doesn't demand anything except occasionally buying another drink. It's escape, comfort, and community wrapped into one alcohol-soaked package. The problem, of course, is that alcohol is expensive when you're earning $1 a day and need to feed a family. That 3-cent whiskey adds up fast. A man who stops at the saloon after work might spend 20 or 30 cents before heading home, a quarter of his daily wages. If he goes multiple times a week, which many do, that's significant money not going to rent or food. Wives wait anxiously on payday, hoping their husbands will come home with most of their wages intact, knowing there's a good chance they won't. Payday drinking is particularly destructive. Men receive their weekly wages and head straight to the saloon to celebrate having money. Hours later, they've drunk half their pay. Some drink it all, stumbling home empty-handed to face furious wives and hungry children. This pattern repeats every week, an endless cycle of earning and drinking and poverty. Saloon keepers encourage it, offering free drinks to men who've just been paid, knowing they'll keep buying once they've started. Women drink too, though less publicly. Respectable women don't enter saloons. That's male territory. But women buy liquor from grocers who sell it under the counter, or they send children to fetch it in buckets. Some women become what were called secret drinkers, hiding their consumption from neighbours and family, sipping throughout the day to cope with the grinding misery of their lives. The shame attached to female drinking is intense, so women who develop alcohol problems hide it, often drinking alone in their tenement rooms while children play nearby. The quality of alcohol in 5 Points is questionable at best, deadly at worst. Cheap whiskey is often adulterated with all sorts of additives to stretch the supply or enhance the effects. Wood alcohol, which causes blindness and death, is sometimes mixed in because it's cheaper than grain alcohol. Tobacco juice adds colour. Sulfuric acid provides burn. Some establishments serve what's called rot gut for a reason. It literally rots your gut, causing stomach ulcers and internal bleeding. But it's cheap and it works, so people drink it. There are also dive bars and concert saloons that are even rougher than regular saloons. These establishments are combination bar brothel gambling dens operating in basements and back rooms. They're dark, dangerous places where violent crime is common and the alcohol is even worse than usual. These venues attract the most desperate drinkers, criminals, and those who've given up on maintaining any pretense of respectability. Getting rolled, beaten and robbed while drunk, is common in dive bars. So is getting poisoned by truly toxic alcohol. Alcoholism destroys families systematically. Father drinks away the rent money. Family gets evicted. Mother drinks instead of caring for children. Children starve or wander the streets. Parents drink and fight. Violence erupts. Children are traumatized. The cycle is predictable and tragic. Social workers and reformers document case after case of families destroyed by alcohol. Children orphaned because both parents drank themselves to death. Domestic violence fueled by liquor. The temperance movement is gaining strength in the 1850s, with reformers arguing that alcohol is the root cause of poverty. They're partially right. Alcohol does destroy families and waste resources, but they're also missing the larger picture. People in 5 Points don't drink because they're morally weak. They drink because their lives are unbearable and alcohol provides the only available relief. Take away the alcohol without addressing the poverty, cold, disease and hopelessness, and you've just removed the only coping mechanism people have. Children grow up surrounded by drinking. They're sent to fetch liquor for parents, learning the way to the saloon before they can read. They see adults drunk constantly, staggering in the streets, passed out in doorways, fighting outside taverns. Some children start drinking young, offered sips by adults or stealing from bottles. Child alcoholism is real and recognised, but there's little anyone can do about it. Childhood in 5 Points is about survival, and if alcohol helps a 10-year-old cope with watching siblings die and working 12-hour days, who's going to stop them? The Irish population is particularly associated with drinking, facing stereotypes that persist for decades. Irish immigrants do drink heavily. Their culture includes strong pub traditions, and they're fleeing famine trauma that practically demands self-medication. But the stereotype that the Irish are all drunks is both cruel and convenient for the native-born Americans who want to justify discriminating against them. Every ethnic group in 5 Points drinks heavily. The Irish just get blamed for it more. Saloons are also political power centres, which is why efforts to shut them down always fail. Tammany Hall politicians hold court in saloons, distributing patronage jobs, buying votes with free drinks, organising supporters. The saloon owners themselves are often politically connected, protected from prosecution or closure. Reformers try to pass laws limiting saloons, but the laws are never enforced because the politicians writing them are beholden to the same saloon owners they're supposed to be regulating. Sunday drinking becomes a particular political issue. Religious reformers want saloons closed on Sundays to honour the Sabbath and prevent working men from drinking away their day of rest. But for many workers, Sunday is the only day they have free time, and they want to spend it in warm saloons with friends. The debate over Sunday closing laws reveals the class tensions in the city. Wealthy Protestants trying to impose their morality on poor Catholic immigrants who have different cultural values around alcohol. The physical effects of heavy drinking are visible everywhere in 5 Points. Cirrhosis of the liver is common, though most people don't know that term. They just know their stomachs swell, their skin turns yellow, and they die. Alcohol damages every organ system, causes brain damage, creates vitamin deficiencies. Long-term drinkers develop tremors, memory problems, and personality changes. They look older than their years, their faces puffy and red-veined, their bodies bloated or wasted depending on how the disease progresses. Delirium tremens, the DTs, is the terrifying withdrawal syndrome that hits chronic alcoholics when they suddenly stop drinking. They hallucinate seeing insects crawling on walls or feeling things under their skin. They shake violently. They become confused and paranoid. Without medical care, which nobody in 5 Points has access to, DTs can be fatal. The seizures alone can kill. So ironically, quitting drinking can be more dangerous than continuing trapping people in addiction, because stopping is too risky. Some saloons serve as informal hospitals for drunks. Bartenders and regular patrons know how to handle someone having alcohol poisoning or DTs. They'll put the person in a back room to sleep it off, making sure they don't choke on their own vomit. It's crude medical care, but it saves lives. The alternative is dying in an alley, which also happens regularly. People pass out drunk in winter, and hypothermia takes them before they wake up. Women's drinking is particularly tragic because of the double standard. A man who drinks heavily is a drunk, which is bad but somewhat socially acceptable. A woman who drinks heavily is a moral failure, a bad mother, a disgrace to her gender. Women alcoholics face harsher judgment, more severe consequences and less sympathy. If a woman drinks away the rent money, she's seen as unnatural and monstrous in ways a man doing the same thing isn't. This gendered moral judgment doesn't stop women from drinking, it just adds shame to their addiction. The relationship between alcohol and violence is direct and visible. Domestic violence spikes when men come home drunk. Bar fights erupt over nothing, a look, a comment, an accidental bump. Alcohol lowers inhibitions and raises aggression, and in a population already stressed to the breaking point, those effects are amplified. Police know that Saturday night will bring waves of alcohol-related violence, assaults, stabbings, beatings. They mostly don't intervene unless the violence spills into wealthier neighbourhoods. Some people maintain functional alcoholism for years, drinking daily but still managing to work and provide for their families. They're never truly sober, but they never fall down drunk either. They found an equilibrium where constant mild intoxication numbs life's pain, while still allowing them to function. These people are actually in the majority of 5 Points drinkers, not the falling down drunks who draw attention, but the quiet, daily drinkers just getting through life. The wealthy uptown drink too, of course, but differently. They drink imported wines and quality spirits in private homes or gentlemen's clubs. Their drinking is sophisticated, socially acceptable, paired with dinner and conversation. When they develop alcohol problems, it's called having a weakness, or taking too much port, not alcoholism. They have doctors who might try cures like spa treatments or travel. The class double standard around drinking is stark. Wealthy alcoholics are unfortunate, poor alcoholics are degenerate. Ultimately, alcohol in 5 Points is symptom and disease simultaneously. It's a rational response to unbearable conditions that makes those conditions worse. It's comfort that becomes destruction. It's community that isolates. It offers warmth in winter and takes everything in exchange. And yet people keep drinking because what's the alternative? Facing every frozen, hungry, desperate day completely sober? That might actually be worse. So the saloons stay open, the whiskey keeps flowing, and 5 Points stays perpetually drunk and cold. Tenements are tinderboxes, wooden buildings packed with people heated by open flames, lit by candles. It's a disaster waiting to happen, and it does happen. Fires break out regularly, spreading fast through dry wood and cheap construction. There's no sprinkler system, no fire alarms, and by the time the volunteer fire brigades arrive, entire buildings are engulfed. People die in their sleep, trapped on upper floors with no escape. Survivors lose everything. And then they move into another tenement just like the one that burned down, because what other choice do they have? The fire risk is everywhere and constant. Your room contains dozens of fire sources. The stove burns coal or wood at temperatures high enough to ignite anything nearby. Candles provide light, their open flames flickering near fabric, paper and wood. Oil lamps offer brighter light but can tip over, spreading burning oil across floors. Smoking is common. Pipes and cigars add more open flames to the mix. All of this happens in a wooden structure whose boards have dried out over decades, becoming essentially kindling held together by nails and faith. The buildings themselves are designed to burn. Wooden frame construction, wooden floors, wooden walls, wooden stairs. Any fire-resistant materials like brick or stone are external only, used for facades to meet minimal building codes. Inside, everything is flammable. The structures are packed tightly together, often with less than 3 feet between buildings, creating alleys that act as chimneys, funneling flames and heat upward and outward. When one building catches fire, adjacent buildings are at immediate risk. Fires start in predictable ways. Someone falls asleep near the stove in winter, their clothing catching fire. A candle tips over on a wooden table. A child playing with matches ignites curtains or bedding. A stovepipe, installed incorrectly or cracked from age, makes contact with wooden framing and smoulders for hours before bursting into flames. Drunks pass out with lit pipes or cigars. The specific causes vary, but the result is always the same. Fire spreads fast and people die. Winter increases fire risk because more people are burning fuel for heat. Stoves are overloaded, glowing red-hot, radiating dangerous levels of heat. Chimneys clogged with soot can ignite, creating chimney fires that spread to surrounding wood. People huddle close to heat sources, their clothing or bedding coming into contact with hot metal or open flames. The desperation for warmth overrides caution, and accidents happen with deadly regularity. When fire breaks out at night, which is when most fatal fires occur, the response time is everything. But there's no alarm system. No smoke detectors will shriek warnings. The first sign is usually smell, or the crackling sound of burning wood. By the time someone wakes up, the fire has often progressed beyond easy control. Thick smoke fills rooms within minutes, disorienting people, making breathing impossible. People die from smoke inhalation before the flames ever reach them. Escape routes are inadequate or non-existent. Most tenements have one narrow staircase serving all floors. This staircase is wooden, often rickety, and becomes a chimney for smoke and flames. If fire starts on a lower floor, it blocks the only exit for everyone above. Windows offer the only alternative escape, but they're small, frozen shut in winter, or open onto air shafts too narrow to navigate. People on upper floors face a horrific choice: burn to death, or jump to certain injury or death on the frozen ground below. Some people do jump. Witnesses to tenement fires report seeing residents leaping from third, fourth, and fifth-story windows, falling through the air to escape the flames. Parents drop children, hoping someone below will catch them. Sometimes they do, usually they don't. Bodies pile up on the street while the building burns above them. It's a nightmare scenario that plays out multiple times every winter in 5 Points. The volunteer fire brigades are supposed to respond to fires, but they're part of the problem. New York has no professional fire department yet. Firefighting is done by volunteer companies that are essentially gang affiliates with firefighting equipment. Companies like Engine Company No. 5 or Hose. Company No. 9 are tied to political clubs and street gangs. When a fire call comes, multiple companies respond, not primarily to fight the fire, but to compete for the glory and the insurance payout. These companies literally fight each other at fire scenes. They arrive and immediately begin brawling over who gets to fight the fire, who gets access to the nearest hydrant, whose hose gets connected first. These fights can last for hours while buildings burn and people die. Rival companies sabotage each other's equipment, cutting hoses, blocking access, even setting fires to each other's equipment. The fire becomes secondary to the gang warfare happening in front of it. When they finally do fight the fire, their equipment is primitive. Hand-pumped engines require dozens of men working in coordination to generate water pressure. Leather hoses leak and burst. Water supply from hydrants is limited or non-existent in 5 Points, where infrastructure is worst. Often, firefighters are just trying to contain the fire to one building rather than save it. Their strategy is to let it burn completely while preventing spread, which means everyone inside is on their own. The water used to fight fires creates its own hazards. In winter, that water freezes almost immediately, coating everything in ice. The burning building becomes surrounded by ice, making it treacherous for firefighters and survivors. Water pools in the street and freezes into sheets of ice. Icicles form from the eaves of burning buildings, a surreal combination of fire and ice. The ice remains long after the fire is out, a frozen memorial to the disaster. Buildings that suffer fire damage but don't completely burn down are often still occupied. Landlords don't repair the damage. Why would they when there are always more desperate people needing housing? Families move into fire-damaged rooms with charred walls and holes in the roof, covering the gaps with canvas or boards, making do with what remains. These damaged buildings are even more dangerous than they were before, structurally weakened and more likely to collapse or burn completely next time. Complete losses are common. The fire burns so hot and fast that there's no time to save possessions. People escape with only what they're wearing if they're lucky. Everything else is destroyed: clothing, furniture, food supplies, tools needed for work, sentimental items, documents. Most people in 5 Points own almost nothing, but losing that nothing is still devastating. You're left with literally just your body, the clothes on it, and the trauma of watching everything burn. Insurance doesn't exist for 5 Points residents. Insurance is for property owners and businesses, not for poor renters. When you lose everything, there's no compensation, no rebuilding fund, no safety net. Charity organisations might provide some emergency assistance, a blanket, maybe a meal, but that's it. You're expected to just start over, which means moving into another tenement and beginning the process of accumulating the minimal possessions necessary for survival, all while still working and paying rent. Children are particularly vulnerable in fires. They sleep deeply, don't wake easily to smoke, and panic when they do wake up. In a burning building, children hide under beds or in closets, their natural instinct to seek enclosed spaces. Parents searching for children in smoke-filled rooms often can't find them in time. The number of children who die in tenement fires is horrific. Small bodies are carried out of burnt buildings regularly, and each one represents a family destroyed by tragedy and poverty. Some fires are deliberate. Arson is a crime of poverty. Landlords burn their own unprofitable buildings to collect insurance. Tenants burn buildings out of revenge against landlords. Criminals burn buildings to cover evidence of other crimes. Accidental fire and arson are sometimes impossible to distinguish, and investigators rarely try. A building burned is a problem solved for someone, usually not the residents who are living there. The aftermath of a major fire is chaos. Survivors stand in the street, often in nightclothes, shivering in winter cold, watching their home burn. Crowds gather to watch. Fire is entertainment in an era before television. Thieves work the crowd, picking pockets while everyone's distracted. Others rush into damaged buildings to loot before they collapse completely. The scene is violent, chaotic, and cruel, with human nature at its best and worst on simultaneous display. Bodies are recovered in the days following a fire, often burnt beyond recognition. Identification is difficult or impossible. Some people are never found, presumably consumed completely by the flames, or buried in collapsed rubble. Mass graves receive the unidentified dead. Families missing loved ones after a fire often never know for certain what happened. Did they escape and are somewhere in the city? Did they die and their body wasn't recovered? The uncertainty is its own kind of torture. Fire-related injuries are severe and often fatal. Burns in the 1850s are death sentences more often than not. There are no burn units, no skin grafts, no antibiotics to prevent infection. Serious burns lead to shock, dehydration, and infection. Burn victims who survive the initial injury often die within days or weeks from complications. Those who survive are left with horrific scarring, contractures that limit movement, and chronic pain. Their injuries mark them for life, visible reminders of the fire they barely escaped. Smoke inhalation damage is poorly understood but widely lethal. Breathing hot smoke and toxic gases from burning materials damages lungs permanently. Survivors cough blood, struggle to breathe, and die from respiratory failure weeks after the fire. There's no treatment, no oxygen therapy, no understanding that you can survive the fire but still die from what you breathed during it. Doctors just note effects of fire as cause of death and move on. The psychological impact is enormous but unrecognised. Modern understanding of PTSD doesn't exist, but the symptoms do. Survivors are terrified of fire, jumping at every sound, unable to sleep, reliving the trauma. Children develop night terrors. Adults become hypervigilant, constantly checking for fire hazards. But there's no therapy, no counselling, no recognition that psychological injury is real. You're just expected to get over it and move on, which most people never really do. Repeat fires are common because nothing changes. The same conditions that caused one fire exist in every other tenement. You survive one fire, move into a similar building, and face the same risks again. Some families experience multiple fires over years, losing everything repeatedly. The trauma compounds, but so does a grim resilience. You learn what to grab if you have 30 seconds. Children first, then maybe one valuable item. You memorize exit routes. You sleep lightly, always listening for the smell of smoke. Wealthy neighborhoods uptown have better fire safety. Buildings are brick, better constructed, with multiple exits. Fire companies respond faster and actually fight fires instead of each other. Insurance covers losses. Better lighting reduces fire starts. The class divide is literal. Poor people burn, rich people mostly don't. And when reforms eventually come, building codes, fire safety laws, professional fire departments, they'll protect wealthy neighborhoods first and 5 points last. But that's future. Right now, in 1854, you go to sleep every night knowing your building could burn. You know the statistics. Someone in 5 Points dies in a fire every few days. You know the risks and accept them because what choice do you have? You can't afford to live somewhere safer, so you blow out your candle carefully, make sure the stove is damped down properly, say a prayer if you're the praying type, and hope tonight isn't the night your luck runs out. Because fire doesn't care about hope. It just burns. Many people in 5 Points are immigrants. Irish fleeing the potato famine, Germans escaping political upheaval, freed black Americans seeking opportunity. They came to America for a better life, for freedom, for hope. Instead, they found 5 Points. They found exploitation, prejudice, and poverty. They were packed into the worst housing, given the hardest jobs, and paid the least. The American dream is visible from here. You can see the wealthy neighborhoods uptown, but it might as well be on another planet. You're stuck in 5 Points, and escape feels impossible. The Irish are the largest immigrant group in 5 Points, and their story is particularly tragic. They didn't want to leave Ireland. They were forced out by the Great Famine that devastated the country from 1845 to 1852. The potato blight destroyed the primary food source for millions of people. Starvation killed over 1 million. Another million fled, packing onto ships bound for America with whatever they could carry and whatever hope they could muster. These weren't economic migrants seeking opportunity. These were refugees fleeing death. The ships they arrived on were called coffin ships for good reason. Overcrowded, unsanitary and dangerous, these vessels lost passengers to disease, malnutrition and storms during the Atlantic crossing. Typhus and cholera spread rapidly in the cramped holds. Bodies were thrown overboard. Those who survived the journey arrived in New York Harbor sick, traumatized, and penniless. Many were orphans, children whose parents died during the famine or on the voyage. They stepped off ships onto American docks with nothing but the clothes on their backs and no idea what to do next. The reception they received was hostile. Native-born Americans viewed the Irish with suspicion and contempt. They were Catholic in a predominantly Protestant country. They spoke with accents that marked them as foreign. They were poor, desperate, and willing to work for wages that undercut American workers. The reaction was swift and cruel. No Irish need apply signs appeared in windows across the city. Landlords refused to rent to them. Employers rejected their applications. They were called racial slurs, depicted in cartoons as ape-like and violent, blamed for crime and social problems. With nowhere else to go, the Irish flooded into 5 Points, where landlords didn't discriminate. They just charged everyone equally exploitative rents. Entire buildings became Irish enclaves, with families from the same regions of Ireland clustering together. County Cork families lived on one floor, County Mayo families on another. These ethnic clusters provided some comfort and mutual support, but they also concentrated poverty and reinforced the ghettoization of the neighbourhood. The Irishmen found work on the docks, in construction, digging ditches and building the infrastructure of expanding New York. It was backbreaking labour that native-born Americans increasingly refused to do, which meant it was available to the desperate Irish. The work was dangerous, poorly paid, and offered no security. Men died in industrial accidents, on the docks, in construction collapses. Their bodies were buried quickly, and other Irish men took their places. Irish women worked as domestic servants in wealthy households uptown, or they took in laundry and sewing at home. They were paid less than native-born servants for the same work, subjected to prejudice and sexual exploitation, and often fired on pretexts. The most desperate Irish women turned to prostitution because it paid better than any legitimate work available to them. The stereotype of the Irish as morally degraded was used to justify this exploitation, while ignoring the economic circumstances that created it. The German immigrants arrived for different reasons. The failed revolutions of 1848 sent political refugees fleeing across the Atlantic. Others came seeking economic opportunity or to escape military conscription. Germans tended to arrive with slightly more resources than the Irish, some education, occasionally some money, often with trades and skills. This gave them marginally better prospects, but they still ended up in 5 points when they couldn't afford housing elsewhere. Germans established their own neighbourhoods within 5 points, with German-language newspapers, churches, and mutual aid societies. They tried to preserve their culture and language while adapting to America. German immigrants tended to be more organised than the Irish, forming labour unions and political clubs. They brought socialist and labour organising ideas from Europe, which frightened American authorities and led to their own discrimination, though less virulent than what the Irish faced. Black Americans in 5 points were a complex community including freed people from the South, children and grandchildren of freed slaves from New York, and people who'd purchased their own freedom. They'd come to New York seeking the opportunities denied them in the South, but what they found was a different form of oppression. Northern racism was less codified than Southern slavery, but still pervasive and limiting. Black residents of 5 points faced discrimination that was in some ways worse than what Irish and German immigrants experienced. They were barred from most professions entirely. They couldn't vote in most cases. New York had property requirements for black voters that effectively disenfranchised them. They couldn't serve on juries. They faced violence from white mobs, especially Irish immigrants who saw them as economic competitors. The draft riots of 1863 would reveal this tension explosively, but the resentment was building throughout the 1850s. Black families were often the poorest of the poor in 5 points, pushed into the worst housing in the worst parts of the neighbourhood. They worked the jobs no one else would take, the most dangerous, lowest paid, most degrading work available. Black women worked as washerwomen and street vendors. Black men worked as chimney sweeps, waste collectors, and in other positions where white workers wouldn't go. Their economic opportunities were so restricted that many could barely survive, yet they persevered with remarkable resilience. The interaction between different ethnic groups in 5 points was complex. There was some intermarriage between Irish and black residents, unusual for the time and scandalous to outsiders. Working-class solidarity occasionally bridged ethnic lines when common economic interests aligned. But more often, different groups competed for resources, jobs, and housing. Ethnic tensions simmered constantly, occasionally boiling over into street fights and riots. Children of immigrants faced their own challenges. Born in America but growing up in poverty and discrimination, they straddled 2 worlds, their parents' old country culture and the American society that rejected them. They spoke English with American accents but were still marked as other by their surnames, their neighbourhoods, their poverty. Many abandoned their parents' languages and customs trying to assimilate, becoming American in ways their parents never could. This created generational tension. Parents who felt their children were abandoning their heritage, children who felt their parents' culture was holding them back. The promise that brought immigrants to America, opportunity, prosperity, freedom, felt like a cruel joke in 5 points. They'd escaped famine, political oppression, and limited futures in Europe only to find different forms of oppression in America. The streets weren't paved with gold, they weren't paved at all. The opportunities were mostly opportunities to be exploited. The freedom was the freedom to starve or work yourself to death for pennies, yet immigrants kept coming. Letters sent home by earlier immigrants usually downplayed the hardships, emphasizing any small successes or opportunities. No one wanted to admit to family back home that they'd made a terrible mistake crossing the ocean. Pride prevented honesty. So new immigrants arrived with unrealistic expectations, and the cycle continued. Each wave of newcomers competed with the previous wave for the same limited resources, driving wages down and rents up. The immigrant experience created its own form of trauma. You'd left behind everything familiar: language, customs, community, often family members you'd never see again. The journey had been dangerous and frightening. Now you were in a strange country where people spoke a different language, followed different customs, and treated you with contempt. You worked brutal jobs for low pay in a neighbourhood that was actively trying to kill you through cold, disease, and violence. The psychological toll was immense but unrecognised. Homesickness was a constant, dull ache. Irish immigrants in 5 Points would gather in saloons to sing songs from home, speaking Irish Gaelic in defiance of American demands to speak English. Germans maintained their traditions through churches and social clubs. Black Americans created their own communities and institutions as safe spaces against a hostile white world. These cultural preservations were acts of resistance, but also reminders of what had been lost, the homes and communities they'd left behind or been forced from. Some immigrants did eventually escape 5 Points. A few managed to save enough money to move to better neighbourhoods or to buy small businesses. The children or grandchildren of immigrants sometimes achieved middle-class stability, though this was rare. Success stories were celebrated in immigrant communities as proof that the American dream was possible, but they were exceptions that proved the rule. Most families stayed trapped in poverty, generation after generation. The wealthy Americans who lived uptown and benefited from immigrant labour never acknowledged their role in creating 5 Points. They paid starvation wages, refused to improve working conditions, and then blamed immigrants for being poor. They published books and articles about the immigrant problem, the dangerous classes, the need to restrict immigration or force assimilation. They treated immigrants as problems to be managed rather than as human beings fleeing desperate circumstances or as workers being systematically exploited. Reformers occasionally ventured into 5 Points with good intentions, establishing missions, schools, and aid societies. Some genuinely helped, providing food, medical care, and education to people who had nothing. Others offered help with strings attached. Convert to Protestantism, abandon your language and culture, prove you're worthy of assistance. The paternalism was grating, but many people accepted help anyway, because pride doesn't fill empty stomachs. The immigration experience created a complicated identity. You weren't fully Irish or German or African anymore. You'd been changed by America. But you also weren't American in any accepted sense. Society made sure you knew you didn't belong. You existed in liminal space, belonging nowhere fully, creating new hybrid identities that combined Old World culture with New World necessity. Irish American, German American, African American, these hyphenated identities reflected the fractured reality of immigrant life. Language barriers added another layer of difficulty. Irish immigrants mostly spoke English, albeit with heavy accents, which gave them some advantage. German immigrants often spoke little English initially, relying on ethnic enclaves where German was spoken. This linguistic isolation made them vulnerable to exploitation. Employers could cheat workers who couldn't read English contracts or understand their rights. Children learned English in streets and schools, becoming translators for parents, inverting traditional family hierarchies in uncomfortable ways. The dream of returning home faded for most immigrants. The cost of passage was prohibitive, and besides, what was there to return to? Ireland still recovering from famine, Germany still politically unstable, the South still denying freedom to black Americans. America had failed to live up to its promises, but going back meant admitting defeat and facing conditions that were possibly worse. So people stayed, trapped not just in 5 Points, but in a country that had become a prison of disappointed hopes. Yet despite everything, the poverty, the discrimination, the broken promises, immigrants endured. They built communities, raised children, preserved cultures, and slowly, painfully, carved out spaces of dignity within undignified circumstances. Their survival itself was a form of resistance against systems designed to crush them. Every day they got up and kept going was a victory, however small. The American dream visible from 5 Points, the elegant brownstones, the well-dressed pedestrians, the clean streets, wasn't a dream deferred. It was a lie, a mirage designed to keep people hopeful and compliant. The system needed their labour but didn't need them to succeed. 5 Points was working exactly as designed, a pool of desperate workers willing to accept any conditions, generating profits for those uptown while bearing all the costs of poverty. And still, somehow they hoped. because what else could they do? So, you've survived. Somehow you made it through a single winter day in 5 Points, a day that would break most modern people within hours. You woke up in a frozen room shared with 8 other people and assorted livestock. You relieved yourself in conditions that defy description. You ate food that was questionable at best, poisonous at worst. You hauled contaminated water up 4 flights of icy stairs. You worked 12 brutal hours for pennies. You navigated streets that were obstacle courses of frozen waste and casual violence. You avoided disease, crime, fire, and 1,000 other dangers that lurked in every shadow and every breath of toxic air. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because that's what survival looked like in 1850s New York for the poor, the immigrant, the desperate. 5 Points wasn't an anomaly or an accident. It was a system, a machine designed to extract maximum labour from human beings while providing minimum support for their survival. The people who lived there weren't there because they were lazy or morally deficient or lacking in ambition. They were there because a society built on exploitation needed someone to exploit, and they were the ones who got crushed by that machinery. But here's what's remarkable. They endured. Through cold that would kill us, disease that would terrify us, work that would break us, they kept going. Irish immigrants who'd survived famine and coffin ships, German refugees fleeing political persecution, Black Americans seeking freedom in a country that barely acknowledged their humanity. They raised children in rooms we wouldn't kennel dogs in. They built the infrastructure of New York, the docks, the buildings, the streets, with their own hands and bodies. They created vibrant cultures, communities, and traditions in the worst conditions imaginable. The children who survived 5 Points winters grew up to become labourers, soldiers, activists, and occasionally, against all odds, success stories. Their children and grandchildren slowly climbed out of the slums, fought for labour rights, demanded better conditions, and changed the systems that had crushed their ancestors. The Irish immigrants' great-grandchildren became police officers, politicians, and business owners. The German immigrants' descendants became part of America's industrial middle class. The Black Americans' descendants continued fighting for civil rights that wouldn't be fully recognised for another century. 5 Points eventually disappeared. The neighbourhood was demolished and rebuilt multiple times. Today, courthouses and government buildings stand where tenements once leaned against each other. The streets are paved, there are sewers, running water, building codes, fire departments, labour laws and safety regulations. All the things that could have saved thousands of lives in the 1850s but didn't exist because society hadn't decided poor people's lives were worth protecting yet. The people who froze in 5 Points, who worked themselves to death, who watched their children die from preventable diseases. They're the reason we have those protections now. Their suffering became the evidence that reformers used to demand change. Jacob Riis photographed their tenements. Journalists documented their conditions. Social workers recorded their stories. Slowly, painfully, those stories created pressure for reform that eventually improved conditions for the working poor. So tonight, as you settle into your warm bed with clean sheets, in a room with heat that turns on automatically, with a bathroom down the hall that has running water and a toilet that flushes, with food in your refrigerator and clean water from your tap, maybe take a moment to acknowledge the people who didn't have any of those things. The ones who shivered through winter nights in 5 Points, who drank contaminated water because there was no alternative, who worked until their bodies gave out because rest meant starvation. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They weren't trying to make history or inspire future generations. They were just trying to survive another day, to feed their children, to make it through one more winter. But their stubborn refusal to give up, their determination to keep living even when everything was designed to kill them, their ability to find moments of joy and community in hell, that's heroic in the truest sense. The warmth you feel right now, the safety, the comfort, those weren't inevitable. They were fought for, often by people whose names we'll never know. People who died in tenement fires, who were buried in mass graves, who left behind no records except their contribution to the city they built with their labour and their lives. 5 Points is gone now, but its lessons remain. Poverty isn't a moral failing. Suffering isn't deserved. And a society that tolerates conditions like those in 5 Points is a society that has failed its most vulnerable members. We've made progress since 1854, But we haven't solved poverty, homelessness, or the casual cruelty of systems that value profit over human dignity. So rest easy tonight, warm and safe. But remember that warmth and safety aren't universal. Remember the people who came before, who survived winters that would kill us, who built the foundation of modern cities with frozen hands and empty stomachs. Remember that the comforts we take for granted were earned by people who never got to enjoy them. And maybe, just maybe, let their stubborn survival inspire you to be a little tougher, a little more grateful, and a little more aware that comfort is a privilege, not a right, and that privilege comes with responsibility to those who still don't have it. Sleep well. You've earned it just by surviving this journey through 5 points, and be grateful you only had to visit. They had to live there. Good night.